I think it's pretty clear that if the assassination attempt on Trump had succeeded, that Biden would have stayed in. People can draw their own conclusions from that, but I believe that. It seems obvious to me that all of these things are connected. But he did drop out yesterday, apparently.
Someone dropped out, Tucker.
Let's start at the beginning.
Yeah.
What just happened?
So I'm driving up here to undisclosed location 1, and I'm getting these phone calls all of a sudden, just like I got random phone calls a week ago that said Donald Trump has been shot, and we didn't even know at the time what was going on. And then suddenly I'm getting phone calls from my team saying, hey, Joe Biden has just dropped out. I'm like, what do you mean he dropped out? Is there an Oval Office address? He's not in the Oval Office. He's supposed to be in Rehoboth. This very suspicious letter, which is signed by Joe Biden in a signature that is different from all of his other signatures, gets put out, and it says that he is dropping out of the race. It doesn't cite a reason. It doesn't cite any specifics as to what's going on, doesn't endorse Kamala Harris in the letter itself, and it's just posted to his Twitter account, just X. So it's posted up there, and we don't hear from him. We don't see him. We don't see Jill. We don't see any of the senior staff. His senior staffers are the ones informing the cabinet after this. So Biden himself doesn't even call his own cabinet to talk to them.
So it's 11:15 on Monday.
Yes.
And as of and by the time this is posted, it may change, but we have not heard from Biden.
We have not heard from Biden or seen Biden personally since, no proof of life, since Wednesday at this event in Las Vegas, where they pulled him out because he was diagnosed with COVID. Nothing.
There's been no sighting of him at all?
As of today, I haven't seen anything. I haven't heard anything. We get all these reports from someone familiar with the president's thinking, familiar with Joe Biden's thought processes, someone who claims that they just saw Biden. But no, there's no Biden. There's no evidence of Biden. There's no sighting of Biden. There's no Biden taking a selfie saying, hey, America, thanks for the memories. Nothing. Not a single piece of it.
The closest we have, I think, is his brother Frank coming out to CBS yesterday, but not on camera.
Right.
Telling the reporter, I love my brother, and for whatever time he has left, I'll be glad to be with him. And then the Biden family apparently comes out and says, well, actually, Frank's an alcoholic. You can't listen to anything he says.
Yeah, that's crazy, Frank. And he hasn't talked to his brother in weeks. But that being said, even if he did talk to his brother weeks ago, and there was a medical condition that raises to that level, then we don't know. Look, that being said, though, what he said, Frank, about Biden, whatever time he has left, that actually lines up with something that I heard from a well-placed White House official, not as high as the inner circle or anything like that, but said something about Biden asking questions about, what is it like to have dementia? What is it like to lose your mind? And realizing that there's no future for you. Your future is your legacy, of course, but your future personally is you're going to be confined to a bed, and you're going to wake up and maybe not recognize people's faces, this type of thing, and that he was asking those questions. And so perhaps when he talked to his brother, he said something similar.
But it's Monday. We're in the middle of 2 wars, and we're in the middle of these wars. We're paying for these wars. Americans are fighting in these wars right now. And there may be a third war with Iran approaching quickly. That's my read on it. And there's no proof that Joe Biden even exists right now.
There's nothing. This is even Khrushchev. So when the Soviets wanted to get rid of Khrushchev in 1964, he was on vacation, and he's down in, I guess it's in the Republic of Georgia now, in Abkhazia, and he's on the beach, and Brezhnev and all the guys get together in the Kremlin, and they say, okay, we're done with this guy. He's old. We're pushing him out. They're like, we're not going to wait for death of Stalin on him. We're just going to go in and decide we're making the move. They get with the KGB because Brezhnev had already kind of maneuvered everything, so his guys were in power, and they run the full Unhumans playbook on him and say, you're done. They have him come back. When he flies back, and they say, we have a meeting to discuss agricultural reports, and they come in. KGB intercepts Khrushchev at the airport. They bring him in. And they hand the letter in front of him and they say, this is the letter, you're going to sign it. And Khrushchev at that point goes, you know what, I'm old. I always kind of knew this day was going to come. So he just goes along with it. He just totally lays out. They put him under house arrest for the rest of his life. He's never seen or heard from again. He gets like a memoir that comes out.
But that's the Soviet Union. I mean, this is a free and
there's
transparent country owned by
like
its own citizens.
Whatever, go on here. I mean,
so you sort
Tucker, that's a crazy other thing.
But what's so bewildering to me is that nobody mentions it. I mean,
go look at the media right now. If Wired.com, it's a conspiracy theory to say that this was a coup. There's this whole hagiography that's going on right now of, it was this tense decision that Biden was grappling with.
But we don't know any of that.
Oh, of course we do. We've been informed by people close to his thinking that this is exactly how it went down. And of course, none of us were in the room. None of us got to see any of this, but we're all told, no, this is exactly what happened. Joe Biden isn't out there himself telling us that any of it's happened. And as of the time of recording, we haven't even heard from Kamala Harris yet, who we're told there isn't anything physically wrong with her. So why isn't Kamala coming out or Jill coming out or anyone coming out and just talking to the American people and at least giving us some semblance of a story as to what's going on?
As someone who's thought for the last few years that this was not a democracy, it's an oligarchy, the real business conducted in the shadows, shielded from public scrutiny by lies and classification laws. I've thought all that for a while because it's clearly true. But to see that all revealed, they just took the mask off.
So what
is shocking.
What you're seeing is a layer being pulled back. And the core is never revealed. So in the intelligence community, you would say, all right, if your cover is blown or you've got an issue with your cover, you've got an issue with our identity, whatever it is, someone's asking questions about the operation, you never come out and say, well, you got me, I'm CIA, yep, Langley sent me. No, what you would do is that you would peel back a layer and say, okay, I may have lied about this thing, but here's what's really going on. But you never get to the full truth. So think of it as layers of an onion, for example. So you never get to the core. Just one peel comes off, and now we're going to go with that. So the peel that's coming off right now is, yes, Leviathan does have to show itself in order for this move to take place. And that's what's happening. So this idea that you live in, that they promote a lot more than Republicans promote, by the way, that we live in a democracy and the people are the ultimate arbiters of sovereignty and justice in America. And we're fighting to protect our democracy. By the way, we're protecting our democracy from Donald Trump, who's the biggest threat to democracy. But this guy, well, we don't like him anymore, so we're just going to remove him and we're going to pull his money and we're going to pull his delegates. And then actually, to me, the most interesting thing that I see is when you watch all these delegates, all these delegations are coming out now. North Carolina has decided they're behind Kamala Harris, and New York says they're behind Kamala Harris, and each delegation starts going. This is like watching the election results in North Korea. Because what do you mean the delegates are suddenly for Kamala Harris? The delegates were voted for by the people of the Democrat Party. Like 14 million people or something voted in this election, and suddenly their votes don't matter anymore. And the oligarchs have just decided.
It does seem like we're at a point where all of a sudden it happened fast. We're beyond words and rhetoric, beyond politics, beyond process even. And we're dealing with people who are absolutely willing to kill other people for power. Like, that's real.
Of course.
And to stage a coup against an elected president who supposedly got 15 million more votes than any president in history.
Where are all the Biden voters?
But it's like nobody even cares about all that stuff. None of that was ever real. Now they're admitting it's not real. And it's just the people with the guns are in charge. It does feel that way.
It's 100% true. And this is, look, we have the book about it. And when you have an oligarchy that is pushed up against the wall, which by the way, they are right now. And it's a dangerous point, but also they would not be doing this if they didn't have to. If they didn't have to go up against Trump, if the assassin's bullet had been 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch to the right, and things had gone a little bit differently in that field in Butler, Pennsylvania, then they wouldn't be having to make these moves, right? Because then it would be, oh my gosh, this horrible thing, but we're gonna trudge on. The election must go on. America must be safe. Joe Biden is the guy, the stable candidate. And you'd be hearing the exact opposite from all of them. They'd be talking about how great Biden is presiding over the funeral of Donald Trump, and maybe give him a state funeral or something like that to sort of, appease the right, but of course never actually give any
But I
power.
wonder if we'll remember what we're learning right now, which is that everything that Joe Scarborough and Wolf Blitzer and Margaret Brennan or, all these people it's all lies. They'll say anything they need to say. The Democratic Party is not democratic in any sense. Its voters are purely puppets, so are its politicians. It's all fake. And that maybe we should just never forget that and say it out loud. Like, none of this means anything. You're yapping about democracy, of rule of law and order. Like, it's all fake. You're totalitarians. You'll kill people who get in your way. You can never have power. And the rest of us should be prepared to make actual sacrifices to prevent you from getting power, because we're going to become a totalitarian state if you do. I mean, those seem like the obvious lessons to me.
The final goal here is the deconstruction of American elections.
Of course.
And the idea that, so 2016, if you look at it through the Unhumans playbook, the Unhumans lens, the filter, is that, these people have taken control and have been in control for, we could debate exactly when the control point took place.
November of 63, probably.
That's a pretty good date.
Yeah. That seems like an obvious one.
Kind of just pull it out of
there.
And so the idea then is that since that's taken over, the national security state has taken over in league with the oligarchs, et cetera, that every president since then has either had to come directly from there, like George H.W. Bush, who was the director of CIA before he became president, or been at least acquiescent to their whims and gone along with their wars, gone along with whatever it is that the plan is for the empire. And then 2016 happens like by accident. And because, who would have thought this guy could come in and take over? And so you have this problem. You're trying to get him out of office the entire time. You're trying to bat him down, kick him off the beachhead but at the same time, you're also infiltrating and you're going through the administration. You're planning your people in to at least subvert as much as possible. So then you get people like Pompeo and people like Bolton get in. So they're trying to run a couple of regime change ops in Venezuela or, doing different things in the Gulf, for example. And so, but it never really goes anywhere because at the end of the day, he's still not one of yours. So then you get rid of him in 2020. Then finally, you have the opportunity to take another bite at the apple. Somehow the lawfare doesn't work. Somehow all of these things don't work. You always know that you have a nuclear option in a situation like that. And the nuclear option is like November 1963.
Yeah, just murder the guy.
But you wouldn't want to do that first. And this was something that the East Berliners understood and the Stasi understood, that if you can just you can assassinate someone's personality, then that's so much easier than just actually killing them, because then you might
break their spirit.
You might turn them into a martyr. But if you break their spirit, maybe, if you're lucky, they commit suicide, or at least they just stay out of public view for forever. This is what was done to dissidents and opposition in East Germany for years. And this is what they understood. This is why they didn't have to go full great purges of Stalin. Once the 1970s rolled around, now you're starting to get mass media, you're starting to get television, all of these tools start to be used. And so you destroy someone's reputation with that. But then social media comes around. In social media, you don't have those tools anymore. And suddenly you don't have control of the narrative. The narrative gets lost to you. So through social media, suddenly people can connect and say, hey, have you noticed this thing? Yeah, I noticed that thing. Did you notice that? I noticed that thing. But the media doesn't seem to be talking about this. And yet when you could say, well, wait a minute, I'm here. I can see it. This is actually happening in front of my eyes. Here's a video of it. Oh, by the way. And I can show you what's going on in real time through live streams, et cetera, et cetera. And so this becomes a massive, massive problem. And so all you're left with at that point, so you lose soft power. So the oligarchs lose soft power, the machine loses soft power. Right. And so they have to go back. What do we have left? We have hard power.
Persuasion doesn't work.
Yeah, persuasion isn't working, you go force. So force is you might, raid somebody's home. And you might say that there's some documents there that they shouldn't have. And then handcuffs, then convictions. But if that doesn't work, the nuclear option of November 1963 is always on the table. Yeah. Hypothetically, Tucker, hypothetically.
Well, I think we just saw it. I do think that. I don't want to think that, but at all. It's the last thing I want to think. But let's just move back.
I will also say this, that Leviathan would not be revealing itself right now if it didn't have to. If they had total control of the election process, total control of the general election, if they could just say flip a switch and put whoever they wanted in office, they would just do that. You would not see any of these extreme measures being reached to if they could just flip the switch. So there's a problem. Something's broken down. Something has gone wrong, because I think what they're really terrified of is a revolt of the people.
Yeah, and I think they've got a lot of internal conflict too.
Yes.
I mean, it's not clear to me. I think Obama has more power than Hillary Clinton in the Democratic Party, but I'm not certain of that. But
he's got the money on his side. So the Clintons have always had name, but they've never had money.
Right.
And so that's why they're obsessed with money. That's why they do Clinton Foundation. That's why Viktor Pinchuk and the Ukrainian oligarchs become the number one for the Clinton Foundation, et cetera, because they have to. Obama, he's got 50 million here. He's got 150 million there. Right. He's taken care of. He's spoken for, which, by the way, is also one of the reasons that that you don't really see Michelle Obama making any moves to getting into the presidency, because all of a sudden you'd have to explain where the money's coming from.
Well, that's exactly right. And that'd be a massive downgrade for her anyway. So what happens next? Biden, well, somebody resigns on his behalf in any case, or this post appears on X, but he does not endorse anybody. And that's followed shortly by his endorsement of Kamala Harris, Carmela, or whatever we're calling her now.
And an endorsement attributed to him.
Right, exactly right. So does she get it? Like, where do we go from here?
So there's a few ways to look at it. Ultimately, here's where we go, because this is what we've seen play out in Russia. We've seen it played out in the Soviet Union. So it's like we have to do Kremlinology. Remember the old Kremlinology of the Cold War? Yeah. That's what we have to do for our own government.
Is Andropov dead or not?
Is Andropov dead? Is Stalin dead? Is this don't tell the people until we have a line of succession, right? First scene of Death of Stalin.
Yeah.
And so, quick, grab his Twitter account, something like that.
Yeah.
And so what you would then do next is you would talk about line of succession. And then you might say, create a series of articles talking about conversations that were had before the handover was taken. You might say, leak some stories. You might have someone running around, but you would never actually have Jill Biden, because she's too upset and she's too angry about what's going on. That's why they can't talk to her. You'd never have Joe Biden, because of course he's not 100% on board with this, at least yet. We have ways of correcting you, and he's still kind of going through that process. None of the family members would at that point, other than Frank, of course, who's coming out and going completely off script here.
The drunk uncle, yeah.
And then you've got to smear, okay, he's drunk uncle, he's alcoholic, don't listen to him, don't listen to that, only listen to us. You must only listen to us. So narrative control already. And what you're going to see is whoever is the most ruthless, the most brutal, the most well-connected, and whoever's most willing to knife each other in the back will rise to power. So we're in the Ouroboros snake eating his own tail moment that's going on right now. But keep in mind that another snake is always around and another snake is always nearby. That's
so the operative assumption for people like me who are, watching but not Democrats and maybe not as informed about what the Democratic Party really is as we should be, is that, they have to go with Kamala because she's sort of black, sort of Indian, and a woman for DEI reasons.
It's tough for them to pass her over because of that.
Well, you would think that. I mean, that's my read on it. I mean, she's a moron in a job she doesn't deserve. That's the whole point of DEI, is to elevate people who don't deserve their jobs to positions of power, obviously. And that they have to kind of roll with that because the constituencies within the party will flip out if they don't pick her. I've just assumed that from day one. That's why she's such a problem.
Well,
but now I'm starting to think,
in 2020, she was never the original pick to begin with.
Oh, I'm aware. Yeah.
Right? This is everything you're describing is why she was picked then, because in the George Floyd moment during the racial reckoning, as a sailor puts it, that, he wanted like Klobuchar, or he was even talking about Gretchen Whitmer back then in 2020. But then George Floyd happens, they go full BLM, and suddenly it's okay. We've got to pick someone that, checks all these boxes.
For sure. And I thought that was, a mistake in that it puts them in a box that it's hard to get out of. But now I'm thinking, because I think we've just watched like the most brutal exercise of raw, undisguised power I've ever seen in this country, that they're not hemmed in by that. Like, they really don't care. They don't care what their own constituencies think. They can just install somebody. And because the Democratic Party is not an ideological movement, it's just a bunch of people clustered together for power.
Leftism is not ideological.
That's exactly right.
It's never been. It's a tactic.
Right. And spiritual, I would say also, but whatever, right. But it's certainly not ideological. It doesn't even matter what the ideas are. But at this point, they can kind of put anyone in. And if they think Gavin Newsom has the best shot and he's a white man, but like, so what?
Well, so this is the way that DEI.
But what do you think?
The way that DEI would reflect itself in a pure power system, in a pure power politics system, is what constituencies can you bring to bear? Right. So the fact that she was able to get Clyburn on board is huge, because Clyburn gives you all of the vote processing centers and the inner city churches. Right. And he's able to, from Detroit to Milwaukee to Philadelphia to Atlanta, these are the key centers that you're going to need. This, of course, Clyburn, of course, is credited for putting Biden in office, and many people have cited his his endorsement of Biden as really being the deal that won Biden the primary.
Was, yeah.
It clearly was. And so I've always said, and this is something where Steve Bannon and I have actually disagreed on this, where I've said I don't see how Gavin Newsom makes it out of Georgia. In a real primary situation, this whatever fakeness.
Well, of course, I agree with you completely. But for the purposes of the November election, maybe they don't have to pick Kamala. We've traveled to an awful lot of countries on this show, to some free countries, the dwindling number, and a lot of not very free countries, places famous for government censorship. And wherever we go, we use a virtual private network, a VPN, and we use ExpressVPN. We do it to access the free and open internet. But the interesting thing is, when we come back here to the United States, we still use ExpressVPN. Why? Big tech surveillance. It's everywhere. It's not just North Korea that monitors every move its citizens make. No. That same thing happens right here in the United States and in Canada and Great Britain and around the world. Internet providers can see every website you visit. Did you know that? They may even be required to keep your browsing history on file for years and then turn it over to federal authorities if asked. In the United States, internet providers are legally allowed to, and regularly do, sell your browsing history everywhere you go online. There is no privacy. Did you know that? Well, we did, and that's why we use ExpressVPN. And because we do, our internet provider never knows where we're going on the internet. They never hear it in the first place. That's because 100% of our online activity is routed through ExpressVPN's secure encrypted servers. They hide our IP address, so data brokers cannot track us and sell our online activity on the black market. We have privacy. ExpressVPN lets you connect to servers in 105 different countries. So basically, you can go online like you're anywhere in the world. No one can see you. This was the promise of the internet in the first place: privacy and freedom. Those didn't seem like they were achievable, but now they are. ExpressVPN, we cannot recommend it enough. It's also really easy to use, whether or not you fully understand the technology behind it. You can use it on your phone, laptop, tablet, even your smart TVs. You press one button, just tap it, and you're protected. You have privacy. So if you want online privacy and the freedom it bestows, get it. You can go to our special link right here to get 3 extra months free of ExpressVPN. That's expressvpn.com/Tucker. Express, EXPRESS, VPN.com/Tucker for 3 extra months free.
Well, the issue is now, so that's why you're seeing this race. So the race that we're seeing now, which is a fake race, and everyone needs to understand that. Like this is why Obama doesn't endorse Kamala Harris. Obama doesn't come out and endorse Kamala Harris. He endorses the process.
Right.
Why? Because the process has no legitimacy. And nakedly, we can see that it has no legitimacy. The delegations immediately flip at the flip of a switch.
Without even hearing from Biden.
There's no hearing. There's no hearing from Biden. Think about that. Think about that. The delegates who are legally pledged to Biden, who were nominated through the legitimate, right? You know, their process, their official process, all of a sudden switch their delegations without even hearing from the guy that they're supposed to be tied to. No, this is obviously the raw sign of Leviathan. This is Leviathan's power. Leviathan comes in and says, you don't work for Joe Biden, you work for me. And what they're using Obama for is to give some veneer of legitimacy and credibility to the process. So
Interesting.
So he's saying there's an open process. I'm not endorsing. I'll endorse after the primary, which is what he did in 2020.
So there's no intention. Which I think what you're saying is Obama, when he endorses an open primary, which he's done, he knows there will not be an open. There's nothing open about this primary. It'll already be decided before Chicago opens.
And I think essentially that what you see here is that the money has all lined up behind Kamala. The money has said, look, we know we've got about 100 days left. We've got 4 weeks before the DNC. Also, you've got a huge accounting problem because you can't, the $300 million that's sitting in that, what was the Biden-Harris account, which is now Harris for president, what are you just going to give that $300 million over to somebody? You've got to transfer all of this stuff. It's going to take a ton of time, and you can't do that without the acquiescence of, again, whoever's controlling Biden's signature right now. So it's just much easier on that level.
How can Biden remain president of the country?
Same way he's been president the whole time. It's not.
I mean, that's a
no.
really
I get what you're saying.
point.
I get what you're saying.
And not to digress once again, but at this point, does anyone doubt 2020 was rigged?
But I will say something has changed from 2020 to 2024. Obviously, COVID's not around anymore. There's been laws that have been placed on the books in those states. And he's just been in such a collapsed state. So with Biden as president, to answer your question, it doesn't make any sense. If you're not mentally well enough, which again, he has not stated. No one has stated this because it's all about polling. It's all about the issue of polling. That's
because his statement yesterday didn't explain why he's not running for president.
It would be best for the party and best for the country. Remember, he put party first.
I noticed.
Whoever put party first. So best for the party, best for the country, for me to stand down. Stand down. What do you mean stand down? If you're fighting for your country.
But why not just take him? I mean, if you can prevent him from running again, you can prevent him from serving now. Why wouldn't they just take him out or kill him? They're certainly capable of that. I think it's fair to say.
It would honestly be okay. So let's say you'd say you're they, you're them, you're the
Democratic Party, and it's leaders. You're the money
machine,
people
right?
in the Democratic Party.
You would want, honestly, and not to give them advice, but wouldn't you want Kamala Harris to have some power of the bully pulpit, power of some kind of record to her name, because whatever record she has, the only things that she was associated with in the administration, other than this wild series of interviews, are the border. And there was that country in Europe, and they were having some issues in 2020. Oh, Ukraine, right? They gave her Ukraine and said that and she goes the one who flies to the Munich conference in February of 2022 and says, there is no question on my mind that Ukraine will definitely be in NATO. And
she caused the war in Ukraine.
Right. So Putin invades the next day.
Of course.
Right. And they give that to her because there's been a shade war going on between Biden and Kamala from day one of this administration. It's very clear. We've been reporting out at Human Events. I think everyone sees it now. Conspiracy theory, right? But it's so obvious they hate each other. So they were giving her these obviously will fail assignments and say, great, pin it on her. But the problem is that's all backfired now, because now if they want her to be the one who's got any credibility, who's going to be signing off on things, they know she's a complete nut job. And so you put something like that in office, and she's going to be signing off on the proxy war with Russia. She's going to be signing off on the proxy war with Iran, perhaps the direct war with China. Who knows what comes next? This is someone who's totally unstable. So what it tells me is that they don't quite have all their hooks in. But one of the things that I'm hearing, Tucker, is that there are people in the Democrat donor base who are thinking like what I'm saying right now, that it doesn't make any sense for us to say she should be president when she could be president right now. That if she's this wonderful, amazing president.
Why wouldn't she run as an incumbent? I've thought that since July 1st when I talked to a very knowledgeable Democrat. Of course, take Biden out, make her president. She's running from the Oval Office. Like, why wouldn't you want that?
The only thing I could think of is this perhaps was part of the deal they made with the Bidens. We'll let you run out the clock.
Yeah, but I mean, these are people who are, willing to do anything, say anything.
I don't think that deal's going to last.
I wouldn't think so.
I don't think it lasts at all.
So Hunter Biden is facing felony tax charges, I think, in October. I think that's right. I could be
for about 5 more minutes.
Exactly. So you just pardon Hunter Biden, clean up the messes, make sure that Jill Biden has enough money to live in Rehoboth for the rest of her life. And it's not hard. And take him out. I mean, it does seem like the logic train leads you to President Kamala Harris very quickly.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
And it makes sense because that way it gives you the power of she's the first woman president. How are you? And you can dig into this chronic propaganda that we've been surrounded by, that women are better than men, that women should be first, that women should have all the power in society. Well, here is the first woman president, and how dare you run against the first woman president?
I wonder if anyone buys that anymore.
Some people do.
It's interesting. I mean, I was kind of agnostic on the question, but we haven't seen big successes from female leaders. And I say that as a lover of women, but I mean, it's at some point, if you make a claim, you do kind of have to substantiate it. And
like, for example, I don't know, female Secret Service agents.
No, I'm just saying, like, where is the evidence for that? I mean, I'm talking about specifically political leadership. Obviously, you shouldn't have what we saw on last Saturday in Butler Township. Obviously, that was insane. But like everyone, of female political leaders will be more conciliatory. There'll be more peace, less war. You've seen exactly the opposite. The Ukraine war was driven by a woman, actually, Victoria Nuland. Hillary Clinton's the most bloodthirsty person I've ever seen on the public stage. Like Madeleine Albright, a total ghoul.
No, a million Iraqi children.
And
so what?
Nasty and stupid. I knew Madeleine Albright, nasty, stupid person also. But leaving that aside, there doesn't seem to be any evidence for these claims at all. In fact, the opposite appears to be true, unless I'm missing something. I mean, I guess you're not supposed to say this because the idea is so important that you can't marshal evidence for or against. You just have to accept it. But I'm a free man, and I just don't see any evidence that female leadership is more likely to get us to peace than male leadership. I see the opposite evidence.
There's even some scholarship that, we actually do have a track record of this, because if you look at, for example, the Kingdom of England, and so the United Kingdom, they've had kings and queens for several centuries now, and at one point, obviously, the throne had real power. Not now. I don't really sure the communists seem to have real power in England right now. Farage is doing a great job, but that remains to be seen. There's some scholarship that shows that when England had a queen, they were actually more likely to go to war, whereas when England had a king, they were more likely to seek peace through diplomatic means.
That does not surprise me based on what I've seen in the United States over the past 20 years. So I don't think, look, as long as we're throwing out all of our standards and norms and traditions, and we're starting at year zero, which is clearly the goal here. When Kamala says, we're unburdened by the past, what she's really saying is,
that's Pol Pot.
Welcome to Kampuchea, exactly. Then we should just be completely honest about everything all the time. Why not? I mean, they already would kill you if they could, so why not just be totally honest? And I'm just kind of interested in this idea of female political leadership being this thing that it demonstrably isn't. And so why does the right feel like we have to go along with these pieties, which are clearly lies? Like, why? Let's just stop doing that.
Well, and think, Tucker, we were, to go back to it again, and we'll dig into it some more, but since we're on the topic, we were, half an inch away from Kamala Harris versus Nikki Haley. That could have been our election.
Right. So let's get to the thing that, one of the, I'm not that surprised that the Democratic Party, which did not want Joe Biden in the first place, they wanted Pete Buttigieg.
That's right.
And they put Biden in. They knew he was senile. I knew he was senile because his sister told a friend of mine that. So if I knew as a right-wing talk show host, then trust me, every big don. Jeffrey Katzenberg knew. I mean, come on, let's stop lying.
The Germans did this with Hindenburg in 1933.
Exactly. That's exactly
like this is the one guy who's kind of palatable, but we can control him,
exactly.
et cetera, et cetera.
So he was always late stage Woodrow Wilson. They knew that.
Yes.
All the surprise.
They liked that.
Bullshit.
Tucker,
of course they did.
Joe Biden is not being pulled from the presidency because he has dementia. He's being pulled because the American people found out.
Well, of course.
They liked
and
the
he
dementia.
can no longer win. Right. So I'm not that surprised by what they're doing, and they're discarding him like a used condom. And I almost feel sorry for him, but he's such a nasty, evil person that it's hard to feel sorry. But whatever, I'm not shocked.
Nikki Haley was nicer, or Kristi Noem was nicer to her dog than they are being to Joe Biden
true.
Right now.
But those are the rules. Like it always ends in tears. It's not a sentimental business. But the attempted murder of the Republican nominee, 9 days ago, that's we're sort of blowing past that now. So let's go back to Butler Township, Pennsylvania.
Well, and
last Saturday,
they want us to blow past that.
Clearly.
Because what's the one thing that could knock an assassination attempt out of the news cycle, out of the conversation? The collapse of an American president.
I think that's right. So let's just get this on tape, if you don't mind. Given what we know now, and I pray we'll know a lot more. But as of this morning, tell us what happened that day.
So I've got here Senator Johnson's office. Ron Johnson of Wisconsin has been kind enough to send us a preliminary copy of their reporting into the situation. very fresh, fog of war, caveat on all this stuff.
Yes.
Because this is what's coming from them. We are told
and
that—
can I say one thing? I think whatever you think of, I like Ron Johnson, but even if I didn't, he clearly has a willingness to pull threads in a way most senators are not. And he's obviously got some decent investigators on his staff, given what he did with COVID. So
I think he's someone who wants the truth of things.
It does feel that way to me.
And that he with a burning desire. By the way, there are 2 senators of Pennsylvania. I don't see them.
No, they're not
doing any of
But
this.
Johnson has people on his, I don't know who they are, but he came up with stuff during COVID that nobody else got. So I think that we should consider what you're about to say in light of that.
All right, and these are predominantly interviews that were conducted through the local police. And that just right off the start should tell you something, because if Johnson's talking to local police, wait a minute, this is the United States Senator. Shouldn't he have direct access to the Secret Service? Shouldn't he have direct access to the ATF, to the FBI, all of these things? And so as his office has been going through the investigation, they suddenly say, well, yeah, we talked to one guy from the ATF who was sort of there, but then he went dark on us. And we talked to a few people at the Secret Service, and they push us to the spokesman, like you're some reporter. We talked to a few people at FBI, but nothing. And then so local police is saying, whoa, wait a minute, we'll tell you whatever you want to know. So why is it that local police are being more forthcoming than our actual government?
Well, this is why they defunded the police in the first place. It's not because they're against police. They seek a police state. They're against anybody with guns they can't control. That's why they're trying to take your AR. I mean, that's the way to understand it.
The goal of defund the police is a national police force,
of course.
Eventually.
Yeah, guys with guns they can control.
And Sharpton has come out and said this.
Obviously. It's so obviously true. Anyway, I keep interrupting you.
So, number one top line, Secret Service did not attend a security briefing that morning.
The morning of the event.
The morning of the event. So, and we can drop back and just explain the whole thing. Donald Trump is having a political rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. This is Western Pennsylvania, about 40 miles north or so of the city of Pittsburgh. On the same day, same evening, Jill Biden, the First Lady of the United States, is holding a dinner event in Pittsburgh. The context of all this is that the RNC is taking place 2 days in advance of it. And so the RNC is taking place. Jill Biden's got the event. Donald Trump is at the event, both in the same Secret Service field office area. Then there's also a lot of Secret Service down in Milwaukee, where you and I were, at the RNC. So Secret Service is totally stretched at this point. It's not like a normal situation. The security posture, because of this, because of the lack of resources, is much lower. The normal people who would be around President Trump aren't there. His A team, as they're called, aren't necessarily there as much. People are spread to all these different locations. This is the context. We also know that there was a strong theory that President Trump would bring his vice presidential pick to that rally, and certainly this was in discussion, held right on the border of where? Ohio. President Trump that morning, we now know, had a meeting with Senator J.D. Vance, who went on to become the nominee, although that pick was not made until Monday. So J.D. Vance doesn't end up.
Well, I happen to know that was the plan, or one of several plans that was under discussion. That's a fact.
Yes.
And I heard it from like a bunch of different people. I heard it from the campaign. So this was known.
Right. I'm hearing the exact same thing, that, and partially the forcing function for that is because the vice presidential nominee must be named on the first day of the convention. Right. And so the idea is, well, why not just bring him to a rally and do it there and have it be, and I haven't quite have you heard why it was that they decided not to bring him?
Yeah, I have. And I think it was just a political question. Where are we going to get more bang for this announcement?
Okay.
But I do know that as of, a few days before, that was actively being discussed. It's a long way of saying what you just said, which is that people watching this had every reason to believe that Trump and his VP pick would be there.
So you see, and of course, Rubio had just been at an event in Trump Doral, I think a few days before, and he was someone who was also very heavily lobbied. We can talk about that later, but heavily lobbied as vice president from a number of people around that same time period. But he had been at a rally in Doral, and yet Trump did not bring him on stage. So a lot of people thought that was sort of the death knell for that potential candidacy. So Trump is holding this rally, and about 10 minutes into the start of the rally.
Wait, first though, the Secret Service didn't even show up at the morning briefing the day of the rally?
Yeah. Right here. Secret Service did not attend a security briefing provided to local special weapons and tactics, SWAT, and sniper teams the morning of July 13th. So when you're holding an event like this, going back to security posture, typically you're going to need to staff up. So you're going to need extra bodies, you're going to need augments, you're going to need more CS, counter sniper teams, you're going to need all of these things because a huge event, outdoor event since November 1963 has always been and will always be the most potentially fatal event that a politician can hold, of course. And so they know that for one of these outdoor events, the first thing you have to worry about is all the tall buildings, all the tall implements. This is why they're held in fields, by the way, for the most part, rather than like inner cities, because cities you would have more vantage points. You've got windows, you've got all sorts of stuff. Dealey Plaza, we can all do the math on this. And so they bring in augments from state police. They bring in augments from the local Butler County Sheriff. They bring augments from the Butler Township Police, and to say, okay, you're going to be working with us. Now, every single presidential event is controlled by the Secret Service. And this woman, Kimberly Cheadle, speaking of female leadership, it tells us that, well, these areas were assigned to the local police, and that's just not true. They may have been in areas that were considered outside the perimeter, but the Secret Service has command of every single hierarchy for a presidential visit, period, full stop. So anyone who's brought into this is working through their operational plan. So the CONOP is done, concept of operations would be done by the Secret Service and then disseminated to these teams. However, we're told that at the basic sync meeting that you would have been having that morning, Secret Service wasn't even there. So the local police say, okay, morning of, let's go. It's the like the coach meeting the team before the game.
Secret Service is responsible for protecting Trump.
Yes,
but they couldn't even go to the meeting that morning. So let me ask you a question.
And this is the meeting
that's bizarre,
where
right?
You're going through what frequency are we on, guys? Hey, I'm Jack. Here's Tucker. We're going to be out there. Okay, you got the building. We're going to be in here. So you would be able to communicate. You'd go through a communications plan. You'd go through the basic workflow of the day. You'd go through your pattern of life.
Yeah.
You would mention if you, I don't know, saw someone flying a drone around or something like that. That type of information could be disseminated. Or if there were any local groups that they had an eye on, you might put out a 6-pack or something like that. Hey, be advised, these are some of the things that we're tracking. These are some of the people that we're looking at. If you had something like that, this is the meeting where you would do that. Secret Service doesn't go.
Crazy. Okay. So then what happens?
So local law enforcement was siloed, no direct radio contact because they didn't go to the meeting. They had no way of contacting directly to the Secret Service snipers who were inside. So you've got these police teams outside.
Even during the event, they had no way to contact them?
They had to contact them through an intermediary. So you'd set up a tactical operations center or a communication, I think it was called the Butler Communication Center in this case, or the TOC. So you'd go through the TOC, and then the TOC has a liaison, and the liaison goes to the Secret Service, and then the Secret Service has to go through their liaison back to the TOC, and then the TOC goes back to the police, as opposed to just being on the same frequency and saying, hey, there's a guy crawling on the building.
So who was this guy, and how did he get there? What do we know about him?
This individual, and I want to skip ahead a little bit in the report because there's a lot in this report. Even, by the way, let me say this real quick. Section 5, Secret Service was initially not going to send snipers to the rally, according to local law enforcement.
Social media are great. They're important. They're the main way we communicate with each other. They're where politics happen in this country. But one of the problems with social media is that the rules change. The people in charge don't want you to say something. They don't tell you that. And the next thing you know, you're without a platform. Well, now you have an option. Parler. It's back. The original free speech app, taken off the internet by the censors, has come back in full force. Parler was the first big app to be pulled off because it was the first big app to make free speech a top priority. Now, other platforms may be relaxing their policies, and they change a lot, but Parler will not change. Its distinct approach is here to stay. By paving the way for other apps to protect users' free speech, Parler has set the standard in the industry. It is now launched on a hyperscaled private cloud called Parler Cloud, and that means your data are secure. Your words cannot be controlled by third-party companies. It's uncancelable. Again, Parler has been canceled. They don't plan to be canceled again, and they've taken extensive and very expensive steps to make sure it's not going to happen. Parler is not at the mercy of other companies that don't believe in free speech. And here's the best part, it's ad-free. You are not the product on Parler. Parler is committed to providing a space where you can share and engage without interference of ads or invasive targeting. So it's more than just a platform, it is effectively a movement, and its goal is to keep the free flow of information open globally, where everybody can talk without fear of suppression. So it's upholding the values this country was founded on: free expression, open dialogue, also innovation, by the way. We're on Parler, at Tucker Carlson, and you can go there and find us and stay informed about what's happening in the world. So join a place that embraces your right to say what you actually think and that fosters connections between people. Without free speech, you can't connect with other people. We're all just lying to each other. But Parler offers you that, a seamless social media experience tailored to your needs. You can get Parler from the App Store, Google Play, or visit parler.com. At Parler, you are valued, you can say what you think, and you're rewarded for doing so.
How does that even happen?
An outdoor rally with a guy who's the former president of the United States, who is imminently becoming the nominee for president of the United States,
right.
Someone who we just know, it's just inherent that Donald Trump has multiple credible threats to his life at all times for like the last decade or so. And they weren't even going to provide counter sniper teams at first to this rally, which, as I just said, is outdoors, which is the most potentially fatal, the most dangerous position a politician can ever put themselves in. We're told the counter sniper team showed up like the day before to actually do some of the casing, not, a week prior. And I've done presidential visits. I've done overseas stuff with presidents and detailees, and you're out there a week before. You're going through the motorcade route. You're checking bridges. You're doing all that stuff. None of that was done here. None of it. 8 days before the rally, local police are informed. 5 days before the rally, they meet with the Secret Service, and they're informed that the rally will be held at the Butler Farm Grounds. 3 days before the rally, Secret Service conducts a site visit. Just 3 days before they conducted the site visit. At that point, no counter sniper teams. On the day of the rally, 9 a.m., they hold the briefing. 46-page slide deck only from the local Butler ESU. Local SWAT and sniper units are there, but the staging locations are laid out. Secret Service doesn't attend. According to attendees of the briefing, no Secret Service or other federal law enforcement is present for this briefing. Secret Service had not initially intended to provide sniper units, but changed course for currently unclear reasons. The briefing included an outline of the security perimeter for the event and areas of responsibility, or AORs. At 9:27 a.m., concurrent, Thomas Matthew Crooks, the alleged shooter, enters a Home Depot located in Bethel Park, Pennsylvania. CCTV footage shows the shooter entering alone. A couple of minutes later, he purchases a 5-foot aluminum dual platform ladder. That's the only time we see the ladder, by the way, Tucker, in this timeline. The ladder disappears after this. 9:42, he leaves. They identify him. 10:30, snipers are in position. And this is interesting.
Can I just ask, so that morning, Crooks buys the ladder.
Yes.
So that suggests he's already figured out exactly what he's going to do.
He's got an idea.
Interesting. Okay.
So the ladder's in place. 10:30 a.m., 2 local law enforcement snipers are in position on the second floor inside the AGR building, the American Glass Research Building. So they don't go to the roof of this building. They go inside the second floor. They sit there. They're looking out the windows, but they never actually go to the roof or apparently to the back of the building to see where this guy came up. 5:10 p.m., Crooks is first observed by one of the snipers, AGR Sniper 1, at the AGR building. And he takes the picture below of Crooks. Not long after that, and I'll show you these in a second, they can put up, AGR Sniper 1 takes a picture below of a bicycle and what appears to be 2 bags located near the AGR building. It is unclear what happened to the bicycle and bags after July 13th, 2024. And take a look at that.
So they're saying that Crooks rode a bicycle to the event?
There's a van that's later found outside the event in sort of the parking area that's about a mile distance from this AGR building. That is Crooks's van. That van is, we're told, contains explosives, homemade explosives, and explosives that are connected to a remote control detonator, which is later found on Crooks's body. So the idea being then, if this bicycle is indeed his, parks the van, gets into the bicycle, carries his rifle, slings it on, you could see the bags in the photo, rides the bicycle from where the van is, that mile distance, to the back of this building.
Okay, so then I'm getting to the next part. I'm sorry to take this from
And
you.
actually, I'm just realizing that I don't believe in the senator's timeline that they have the drone.
What drone?
Crooks' drone. Unless I'm missing it.
He has a drone too?
It's now been reported that he, at some point prior to 5:10, so around 3 in the afternoon or so, when things are still getting prepared, he's there with a drone flying a flight pattern around the area of the Butler Farm grounds.
That's insane. You can't, I mean, I just know from living in DC, you can't just operate drones around law enforcement. It freaks them out.
No, or Don Jr. told me, and I think he said in one of his recent interviews, that when his father was at his house for like an event, like a family event and a party, that he wanted to put up one of his drones, and the software wouldn't allow the drone to even take off because a Secret Service detailee was in the vicinity. My cousin was getting married in southern Pennsylvania, which is pretty close to where Wilmington is, and she wanted to have a drone up at her wedding. And because Biden happened to be in Wilmington at that point, she was within that 30-mile radius. You know, the photographers come to her and say, "Hey, we can't do any drones here."
This is crazy, and it's also sophisticated. So the guy's got. It seems like he's got a van, explosives, a bicycle, a rifle,
a drone,
a ladder, a drone,
a rangefinder.
A rangefinder. I'm going to ask you about that in a second. And the guy knew this was coming. This wasn't a spur of the moment thing. He's buying the ladder that morning. And he's making a shot that everyone is sort of, I know everyone's like, oh, it's not 140 yards, not that far. I think it was 140 yards.
It's a boot camp shot.
Yeah, boot camp shot. Still, I don't know. I fired that rifle yesterday. You know, you kind of have to.
With no scope.
He had no scope?
No scope, iron rails.
Are you sure?
Yes.
He used iron sights to hit someone.
He used iron sights.
In the face at 140 yards.
My take on that, and just my assessment, was that he knew that because he was lying prone, he knew that a scope or an EOTech or something would present more of a picture to any counter snipers. So if you wanted to stay lower, if you wanted to stay more out of sight, and he's using the angle of the building to conceal himself, that you wouldn't want something. That
okay,
was
I'm
really
calling bullshit on this whole thing. I'm trying not to use swear words. Excuse me. This is not plausible. This kid's a 20-year-old, much bullied, socially awkward, weird kid who washes out of the rifle team because he can't shoot. He's got no social media profile. His search history suggests no research into any of this, and he sounds way too sophisticated.
And what the videos that they're not talking about are the fact that he appears in this like BlackRock ad, and as well as a number of YouTube videos regarding computer programming that he was in the previous.
Okay, so I know that all of your former military. I wasn't even in the Boy Scouts, but I shoot a lot. I have all my life, and I just disagree with respect with all the former special forces and CIA guys and guys like you. I think 140 yards with iron sights hitting a man in the face, pretty good shot. I'm just saying that. I do. No one else agrees with a boot camp shot, but this guy didn't go to boot camp. And as someone who also didn't go to boot camp but shoots a lot, 223 a lot, including yesterday, I think it's a decent shot. I do. It's hitting steel the size of a tea saucer at 140 yards with iron sights. Like, that's not, I mean, I could probably do that, but again, I shoot a lot.
Well, and Tucker, there's another piece.
But for a guy who's 20 years old, like, how much range time do you have? Like, where did he learn that?
There is some reporting. So this was his father's gun.
Yeah.
And so after flying the drone, he drives all the way back to Bethel Park, Pennsylvania, which is a distance of about an hour, both ways. So he drives an hour back, says, "Hey, Dad, I'm going to take the gun out." And the dad later tells media, at least as of right now, and caveat to all this stuff, because we're going off of what we have right now, that the dad says, "I thought he was going to the range." So this sounded like that was a regular thing that he did.
Okay. Then that's, I mean, it's not a crazy long shot, but it's just, but you kind of have to commit a little bit to learning how to operate the rifle if you're going to hit it 140.
Listen to this part, because if you want to talk about the shot, so a lot of people think that he was just sitting there prone, waiting for the opportune moment. Trump happens to turn at the last moment. That's it. That's not what happened. What happened was a couple of these local police officers, and we've gone through the timeline where they take the picture of him, they're radioing the messages back, and Trump's team, the actual team around Donald Trump, doesn't get any of these messages, because the easiest thing to do would be to say, "Hey, let's check that guy out before we bring the president out on stage." They never relay the message to Trump. They never give that to his team. his direct body detail. They never hear about this guy. So there's a threat. There's a threat that's identified an hour prior. They're taking photos of him. They're checking on him. They lose sight of him. That's when he goes up on the building, we're told. And they're calling in saying, hey, there's a guy. He's got a rangefinder.
Okay, so that's what I want to ask you. So will you explain for people who aren't familiar with the device, what's a rangefinder?
So a rangefinder is something that somebody might use in site surveying. Someone might use in laying out a plot of land or nice barn like this one or something like that.
And in deer hunting.
In hunting,
yeah.
And of course in a sniper team, a rangefinder is used by the spotter. So sniper teams are always called that because you've got a spotter and a shooter.
Right.
So the spotter is the person who's doing the range finding. They might be calculating wind. They might be.
It shows you the distance.
It gives you the distance
away from something you're looking
from whatever it is. Right. So you're painting it with a laser, and you're saying.
So if
this is how far away
you're trying to protect, the most controversial political figure in the world at an outdoor rally, and someone shows up with a rangefinder. Like you can't even bring at the RNC. You couldn't even bring your Juul, and you couldn't even.
You couldn't have a vape in there. Yeah,
right, because it might increase your testosterone, and that's a threat. But how do you get a rangefinder into a protected event? That's like the craziest thing I've ever heard.
So he never goes in through the magnetometers, as far as we know. There was reporting early on that the rangefinder was found in the magnetometers, but the current reporting. Caveat, is that he always stayed outside the effective Secret Service perimeter, that there's this whole range of fencing. By the way, for the record, I'm not saying anything about what I think right now. This is the official story.
Right.
So there's this whole setup off to the side of where Trump is standing, where there's a fence and there's nothing. There's no Secret Service. There's a couple of patrols. There's these guys in the building. Anybody could have walked up with anything.
How does the kid know where that unprotected area is?
So he's casing the area. He's going there prior. He's flying the drone. He's checking it all out. But for whatever reason, he just knows to ride the bike directly there, and then he's going to have a direct shot from the top of the roof.
This kid doesn't have a job. I mean, he's 20 years old.
He works in a nursing home.
I'm sorry. That's right. I read that.
Very, very tactically.
No, but that's right.
Job.
He's changing bedpans by day, but he somehow is able to assess exactly the place that's got the height advantage, this building, and that is unprotected. Like, how would he know? I mean, the luck involved is extraordinary.
It's more than just that. There's luck, because we're also told, and again, this timeline doesn't quite have it, that at one point the local police, the Butler police, do go out, and they send a couple of units to go, a couple of guys over to go and say, hey, we think there's someone on that roof. We're not sure why the sniper team inside the building doesn't just go and check the roof of their own building, but some guys who are on the ground, one officer hoists the other officer on his shoulders, so it's not that high of a building, to say, hey, take a look up there. And they couldn't find any ladder from their vantage point. They go up there, officer sees Crooks turns, trains the rifle directly at the officer ducks down, and we're told that, again, based off of this officer's reporting, that at that moment, Crooks swings the rifle back around and begins firing at Trump. So this wasn't a situation where he was sitting there, lying in wait, totally unintercepted, and fires the shots. We're told that those shots ring out within seconds of him switching his sight picture back and forth from the officer back to Trump.
So I think, again, as a non-expert, but a lifelong shooter, I think that's a pretty adult shot. Do you? I mean, you're in the military.
Being able to switch the sight picture that far at that range, maintain your cool, and still get off a shot which has a little bit of connection to the ear that's a fantastic shot.
Oh, it is, right? Okay, good. I'm glad someone said. I keep hearing, everyone on television's like been in, Delta Force or something, and they're all crazy accomplished shooters. But for a non-veteran with no law enforcement background to make a shot like that strikes me as
although I would say
amazing.
The one thing that I would just add, though, is that in the military, and I wasn't like some sniper or anything, but very basic level of training, and some mountain training and stuff like that, that you're not trained to go for headshots. You're trained to aim center mass.
That's right. Of course.
And that's any basic firearms course is going to train you center mass. Why? Because the heads turn.
Yeah.
So the head turns, the head moves around. That being said,
it's a smaller target.
It's a smaller target, center mass. You've got your central nervous system. So you've got the brain stem, you've got your spinal column, you've got lungs, you've got heart, you've got all sorts of important real estate right here. So as long as you're somewhere along that parallel axis, you're gonna more than likely hit something. And you've got more of a sight picture. So you've got target-rich environment if you're going for center mass. And to this point, I have not seen reporting on whether or not Trump was actually wearing a bulletproof vest that day. I don't think he was.
He was not shot in the chest, by the way. There was early speculation that he was. I asked him directly. He said he wasn't.
Well, and that was something with Reagan, too, because Reagan does get hit. And at first they thought it wasn't that bad, but later it turned out there was internal bleeding and there was just other stuff that was going on.
So how, from the video we have all seen, the counter sniper, Secret Service counter sniper is lying prone, and he clearly has the shooter in his glasses. He's looking at him. He does not shoot the sniper until after the sniper has shot Trump. How could a Secret Service counter sniper look at a man with a rifle 140 yards away and not shoot him? I don't understand that.
So 2 schools of thought. One option is he thought it was a police officer. Because remember, the local police are supposed to have control of this building, and they don't have any communications with local police. And there have been so many times, Tucker, at events where someone from one agency, because they're dealing with these augments, they're dealing with people from, and there's a ton of HSI from Homeland Security that are there. There's a ton of these other local agents. You've got multiple agencies going around, which even worse at the RNC, but I think there was like 130 different agencies that were at the RNC represented. So if you don't have good communications because you didn't go to the meeting, then you have no way of knowing, hey guys, do you have someone on that building or not? Because I see someone with a rifle, doesn't look like a police officer, and he's aiming his rifle at the president.
Yeah,
so the question, Tucker, though, is if you know that at that point, why isn't your first call to your detail sitting right with the president and say, hold him? Don't let him go on that stage.
There's a guy with a rifle pointed at the stage. Yeah, I think
which, by the way, I mean, we've all been at Trump events or whatever politician events where they show up a couple of minutes late. Like it's never been a place taking pictures. They're talking to somebody, whatever.
So who are these? I mean, have we heard from the counter sniper team?
From the Secret Service?
Yeah.
No.
In a world increasingly defined by deception and the total rejection of human dignity, we decided to found the Tucker Carlson Network, and we did it with one principle in mind: tell the truth. You have a God-given right to think for yourself. Our work is made possible by our members. So if you want to enjoy an ad-free experience and keep this going, join TCN at tuckercarlson.com/podcast, tuckercarlson.com/podcast.
So was Senator Johnson able to interview them?
No. It's all been Kimberly Cheadle, go to the spokesman. I'm looking through the report again here to see if anything. There's lots of questions, lots of outstanding questions that the senator's written here.
Oh, so this is, but if I can just say, this is the point where the Secret Service is incumbent on them to prove that they didn't allow this kid to shoot Trump, because it certainly looks like they did allow it. And so I don't understand why there isn't a delegation of senators and members of Congress and citizens standing outside blocking the entrance to the Secret Service headquarters to answer the question. You are, I think, based on everything you've said, they are presumed guilty. Now, they may not be guilty, but they have an obligation to explain how they're not guilty. And no one is forcing that explanation. Like, what is going on?
So Tucker, here's an interesting thing when you look at government. So in criminal justice, you have the presumption of innocence. So the government has the presumption, the evidence must be on their side. So they have to bring the evidence, the burden of proof is on the government because the government is bringing the accusations. I say when it's the government, it's the opposite. I would say the burden of innocence is on the citizens and the burden of guilt is on the government.
It's certainly what this fact set. Common sense suggests like this is screw up after screw up after screw up, which put together suggest an intentional series of screw ups, which would have allowed Trump to be murdered, and whatever else would happen after that. So like the fact that they haven't explained themselves and haven't been forced to explain them, and I mean forced to explain themselves, tells you that things are totally out of control.
So as we record,
Like they can do anything and nobody can do anything about it.
So as we're recording this, Kimberly Cheadle is supposedly testifying in front of Comers right now. And that being said, well, caveat, there might be something that comes out of that. The House has started to look into this, but I think without question, and something that Speaker Johnson has spoken of, which I certainly agree with, is that this needs to be investigated.
You can't murder people.
The House needs to set up a commission that's 10 times bigger than whatever the J6 commission was.
You think?
And we need to get absolutely to the bottom of any of this, because when you talk about crooks, we can talk about crooks for a little bit.
Yeah, and I keep
this guy
wrecking the flow of your story here.
They say that this guy was a total ghost on social media. He's not a ghost on social media when he's 20 years old. That means he's making himself a ghost. That means he's got programming knowledge. He knows how to use encrypted accounts. No, he knows how to hide what he's doing online. He knows how to use VPNs. He knows how to use Tor. He knows all of that stuff, Tor browser. And so he's able to mask what he's doing online. Now, and again, all hypothetical, but the question is, how did he know all of this information? How did he know this? Did he know that there would be a low security posture at this event? Did he know that the Secret Service would be split between multiple events? I don't think anyone was really tracking that from the outside, that, hey, Jill Biden's got an event here and Donald Trump's got an event here and the RNC is right here. So Secret Service doesn't have...
What's his... but I missed the most obvious question, which is, what's the kid's motive?
Well, Tucker, it's one of those great times where the government is telling us authorities are baffled as to what the motive might be.
Well, I thought they were telling us that Iran did it or Assad did it.
Within a few days,
he was going to gas Trump with his poison gas reserves.
Within a few days after, we get this story about gas his own people.
It was Iran
when he's winning the war.
Iran did it. Okay.
And so we're told it was Iran. But that being said, the Iranian, that stuff goes back to Soleimani. Right. That stuff is like some old, we're going to get you back.
It's also clearly manipulative.
From this. And it's interesting that the first country that we get told may have had a role in this is exactly the same country that the Leviathan and the oligarchs and the neocons want to go to war with.
Obviously. No, it's also transparently fake. But like, why would a kid die to kill Trump? Like, what do we know about? Do we know anything about the guy? What do his parents say? I mean, what is this?
So
there's a news vacuum around the most dramatic thing that's happened in the past 20 years in the United States.
Tucker, think about how CNN or regime media would go after a J6 family, right? They would go after, they've got the cousins, they've got the sister, they've got the brother, they're knocking on doors, they're talking to everyone who's ever met that person. They know your grocer, they know the guy who works at your, in this case, Sheetz. They're talking to every single person who may have come in contact with you. With this, got a couple interviews.
So we don't know what his motive was.
Of kids. They're not putting out any motive. The most they're saying is that they found on his phone photographs of Trump, photographs of Biden, searches for the RNC, searches for the DNC, searches for pornography, by the way. One of his final searches on the day of, that wasn't in the timeline, but we're told that on the day of, he was searching pornography. And I think that's about it. And that's all we're getting.
Is there evidence that there was more than one shooter?
There's a lot of questions. There are some photos floating around, very heavily pixelated, of something on top of a water tower that we have no idea what that is. It appears to be in some of the photos and some not. Couldn't tell you what that is. There's also some pretty compelling evidence that shows the sight lines from where he was on top of this AGR building. And then keep in mind, by the way, we haven't mentioned it, but the people actually died at this. So Corey Compatore, this firefighter, actually was killed. So I know there's this like left-wing theory that, it was all staged and it was all fake, but someone did actually die. This wasn't a situation where, Trump is calling him up saying, Tommy, I know you're the best sniper in the world, so just the ear, Tommy. No, it's ridiculous when you actually. It's my favorite conspiracy theory about all of it. But in terms of it, we don't have any evidence of any other shooters at this point. But we also have a striking lack of evidence about this shooter at the same time.
So Ron Johnson, in an interview yesterday, said that there was some as yet unidentified man in a gray suit,
yes,
who showed up on the scene and told witnesses to send photographic evidence, pictures and video, to him
of the body.
of the body. So tell us what we know about this guy.
So, and this is spoken to in reports all over the place now, but this is spoken to in the report where they're told there's this man in the gray suit, and that the man in the gray suit was later identified as somebody, what it looks like, because he had a 215 number. That's the Philadelphia area code. Familiar, because everyone I grew up with had a 215 or 610 area code, that stated to be from the ATF's Philadelphia office. They requested the photos of crooks for facial recognition purposes. It's more of an FBI thing, but okay. The staff called the phone number, confirmed that it was associated with the ATF. However, in subsequent attempts to establish further talks with the individual at that number, Senator Johnson's staff received the following email, and it's just total boilerplate. Direct all of your questions to our main office, our main spokesman. This is an ongoing investigation. We'd like to coordinate our request, blah, 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 blah. So this guy's gone totally dark. Whoever this man in the gray suit was, who happened to be probably one of these augments from the ATF office, he's sent out there at the same time that apparently we can't get any extra secret service. We can't get anyone from all the other offices. You're relying on local police to secure, obviously, the most opportune building to connect an assassination shot from President Trump that's completely unguarded from the roof, has nobody on it. Nobody thinks to put anybody on it. Like, I mean, I don't know about you, Tucker, but when I go to these events, every time that I've gone to a presidential event, I'm thinking, especially if it's outdoors, I'm thinking, that building, that building, that building, that building, this thing over here. This is, by the way, when you see the, when they hang the flags from cranes and stuff like that, or they might have some farm equipment up, or the, the fracking wells that were used in the Butler rally from 2020, by the way. Those are meant to be security implements. In addition to decorative, they're also used for concealment of potential snipers. So, okay, you've got a guy who could be on this building. Great, put a flag in front of it. So now you can't see. So now that building it's not completely protected, but it's at least less of a threat than it could be. This building, from there to the stage, nothing.
What makes me feel that things are completely out of control in this country is 8 days later, 9 days later, we still can't answer the most basic questions about any of this. And the people who are in charge of protecting Donald Trump's life have not answered the questions. They haven't been held to account. It's pretty obvious they never will be. It does feel like there's no recourse. Like they can just murder a guy or allow his murder, and the rest of us just have to sit there and be like, yeah, that's kind of how it goes. Like that's not the country you want to live in at all. That's not the country it was 5 years ago. What is this?
We've held one FBI briefing. We had one FBI briefing like the day of, explaining what happened. Where are the daily briefings? Right? When there's a fire in downtown, whatever city, inner city, you're getting at least 2-3 briefings. Maybe what happened, a fire or a mass shooting. Okay, where's the day 2 briefing? Where's the day 3 briefing? Where's we brought the parents in for questioning. By the way, I left this out. One of the things that he was searching, Ethan Crumbley. Do you remember Ethan Crumbley?
No.
Ethan Crumbley was the school shooter where his parents later got charged for giving him access to the gun. So in this situation, his parents also gave him access to the gun. He may have been looking up whether or not his parents would get charged for what he was about to do. And on his Steam account, the video game online platform, he posted, July 13th will be my premiere.
Do we have any indication of what drugs he may have been on?
So at this point, no. Total radio silence. However, both of his parents were behavioral counselors licensed. So certainly people who would have access to all the finest SSRIs, antidepressants.
So there does seem to be a connection.
And there were some searches found on him for major depressive disorder, which is an actual set phrase. That's not just, I'm looking up about, like the average person might say, hey, I think I'm depressed. What are the signs of depression? What are the symptoms of depression? But someone who knows that set phrase, major depressive disorder, like, oh, I don't know if your parents were both behavioral counselors who had access to doctors, access to these type of medications, you might know to use that phrase.
Okay. What do you think happened?
Tucker, there's one thing to go off the evidence, right? And there's one thing to go and sit there and say, okay, this is all the evidence we have. None of this adds up. I've never seen anything like it. I've never heard of anything like this about someone. It sounds ludicrous to me that the guy rides up with a bicycle, and look at the picture. It's just a regular rifle bag sitting there on the bicycle. Anyone who's shot a gun ever could look at that and say, well, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what that is.
There's a black gun in there.
And oh, by the way, nobody else is riding bicycles around here with backpacks, flying a drone with a rangefinder. It's like, what else did this guy need? A big sign that says, "I am the sniper," and pointing it down at him. And they see him an hour before, half hour before, 15 minutes before, 10 minutes prior before Trump comes out. 6:11, by the way, is when the bullets are fired. And so then we're told this is key. And actually, I'm setting all that stuff aside because that's not actually where I'm focused on what I want to know more about. I want to know more about these explosives. Why haven't we seen any pictures of the explosives? Why haven't we seen or even heard any information about how sophisticated were these things? We're told they were remote control detonated because they said they have a detonator. We've seen pictures of the detonator, also provided by local police, by the way, not the federal enforcements. So if this kid knew enough to build remote control bombs, you really think that he's just doing that one time? You think that's just the first day that I'm going to build some bombs this morning and drive down to the Trump rally? No, this is something that he had been planning. This is something that he had been in preparation for. This is something, by the way, when typically we see, especially when we know if he's using encrypted accounts, if he's using the internet in the way that he's able to at that level, that perhaps he's in communication with somebody through those accounts. Perhaps people who know how to build bombs. We don't know. Okay, we don't know. My question is, I want to see the level of sophistication on these bombs, and I want to see if this is something that he was able to actually pull off on his own, because we don't have answers about the pipe bomber from Jan 6. By the way, the pipe bomber who, by the way, was directly connected to someone who never acknowledges it. What was her name again? Oh, right, Kamala Harris. So the pipe bomb was found directly outside the DNC. Kamala Harris is inside. Her Secret Service detail, again, Secret Service, is right outside, is informed of the pipe bomber the same way the Secret Service was informed of the sniper, and yet doesn't respond. And we have them in video. Darren Beatty and Revolver have the great video of this, where the Secret Service is just letting people walk around in front of this pipe bomb, and Kamala Harris is inside, yet she has never publicly acknowledged this real pipe bomb was a threat to her life, right? Why aren't we hearing that? Why aren't we hearing Kamala Harris nominated to be president after surviving an assassination attempt on her life on January 6th? Why have you never heard that phrase from the media?
Not one time.
Not one. Why wouldn't you?
Because it's fake.
Because it's totally fake.
Yeah.
And so again, we have another situation where explosives are involved. There's the shady ATF maybe agent in a gray suit. The Secret Service is involved. Kamala Harris is like tangentially involved because she's the one who somehow seems to be the beneficiary of all of these things, at least in the current moment. And we're also told, by the way, explosives at the house. So like what kid is like, I've got kids, they're not 20, but if my kids are making bombs, I'm going to know about that. Like I'm going to say, hey, what are you working on, son?
Right.
You making some bombs? Am I going to show them a better way to run that circuit? No. I'm going to say, hey, don't do this. Like, this is what's going to put you on a list.
So are you suggesting you think the Biden administration, which was responsible for Trump's security, allowed this to happen?
It's not outside the realm of possibility. It's just not. And I think as I wouldn't necessarily say it was Biden's call, though. That's the part that
the Biden administration
have hesitation.
I mean, one of the weird quirks of our system is, especially now,
the Biden administration is the name, but that's not actually
of
the person
course,
who's
but
running it.
Donald Trump is running to displace, the Democratic Party from its position of power, but the party controls his security.
Let's say you knew.
That's very weird.
Let's say you knew that the security posture wouldn't be doing well back then. Let's say you knew that that Secret Service was stretched then. Let's say you knew, for example, that Trump's normal team wasn't around him, the people that are used to the type of threats that come around when Donald Trump is in town and holding a rally. And let's say you also, and keep in mind that when you're talking about FBI, when you're talking about loners like this, I'll just say this. My mind keeps going back to the Garland, Texas shooting. So you might remember this. It was like Pamela Geller, and they did Draw Muhammad. Actually, I know some people who were there, very well people who were there, that was then later attacked by a couple of these locally trained, homegrown domestic terrorists who were supposedly in support of ISIS at the time. Well, we know that there were two guys who opened fire, and that the two guys were both shot and killed. And we know that, and they were killed before everyone else was able to be killed inside Garland, Texas, 2015. But did you know about the FBI guy in the car behind them?
directing the whole thing,
that had texted, "Tear up Texas." That this entire thing, Elton Simpson, and this came out, by the way, because they had a third friend who was later charged with like financing all of this, that his lawyer uncovers text messages and communications and discovery about an FBI employee, as well as multiple informants that are all involved with this mosque that they're attending in the Phoenix area. And one of the agents, or one of the employees, is paid like $132,000 over the course of years to befriend these guys and to push them in this direction of radicalization. And then we're told that, and all of this comes out in the lawsuit, by the way, completely thrown out based on standing grounds, sovereign immunity, that not only, think about it, for years, we were told that these were just a couple of nut jobs trying to shoot up a conservative Muslim Muhammad event, whatever. That not only is there an FBI guy talking to them, and The Intercept, by the way, used to report on things like this, and he's saying, "Tear up Texas." He's inciting them to violence, knows that they're going to the event, and is sitting in the car behind him, behind the two of them, when they open fire. The initial photo that was reported by local law enforcement of the event was taken by the FBI asset who was sitting in the car. That's how he was able to get the photo, because he was right there. Wow, what a great shot, A photographer at the Trump rally, of course, well, the New York Times was there. And, obviously that's at the beginning of the rally, that's when the photographers always come in. And then the photographers leave after a couple of minutes. There's like the set period when they come in, and then they leave from that directly under the ground shot. Kind of interesting that that's when the shots were fired, but let's leave that aside. That he was sitting in the car behind the Garland, Texas shooters when it took place. And when that happened, Tucker, he fled. He was actually stopped by local police and arrested. They said, "Why are you fleeing the scene?" And he said, "Well, I saw a shooting. I didn't know." He was put in handcuffs at one point. Later, it came out years later, this guy was an FBI asset. He'd been talking to them the entire time. Comey wiped the entire thing under the rug.
So there's precedent for this, and I think January 6th is the perfect example. We've never gotten an accounting of how many federal agents were in the crowd, but an enormous number, way disproportionate to any other event I've ever heard of in Washington. And it was, to some extent, organic. To some extent, it was a setup. That's my sincere and pretty well-informed opinion of that. So, it's not, this kind of thing has happened before. The stakes are high.
One of the questions that I would add to the senators list here, and it's a good list, and they've done great work, but one of the questions that I would add that I don't see, so we keep getting told there were sniper teams, there were counter-sniper teams, local law enforcement, sheriffs, blah, 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 the whole list. But then we're told that there was an ATF agent who shows up in a gray suit with no credentials. No credentials. Oh, so you mean he wasn't in uniform? You mean he wasn't wearing the blue jacket with the yellow lettering that we've all seen that says ATF? So does that mean he was plainclothes? So does that mean he was, in fact, undercover? So if this guy was there plainclothes as federal law enforcement, how many potential other law enforcement types did they have in the crowd that day at Butler? No one's even talking about that yet. So that's the main thing that we need to be asking to Chris Wray, to others. Was this guy who was conducting all of these searches, who was doing site surveys, who was buying ladders, who was flying a drone overhead, was he on your radar? Was he someone that training for an AR-15, training for potentially taking out a president? Was he on your radar? I mean, this is why we have the FBI, right? This is why we pay for all these things, and we're told that, oh, well, we need the surveillance state, we need the Patriot Act, we need all of this because it's keeping us safe and it's keeping Trump safe.
So you just came from the Republican convention in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
I didn't hear anybody talking about this, including the former president. And I do think, well, I don't know, but my sense is he doesn't want to stoke more division than we already have. On the other hand, someone who tried to murder him came incredibly close. And at very best, the Biden administration allowed that to happen, whether intentionally or not. But they allowed that to happen. They didn't have a briefing that morning. It was negligent to the point of criminal behavior.
For me, it comes back to the fact that the two pieces, in addition to the no briefing, the fact that no one was on the roof at any point other than apparently this Thomas Matthew Crooks. Right. And then finally, once all law enforcement around the event knew that there was a problem, knew that something had gone wrong, and Trump is still backstage.
I know.
The first call you make is to his detail and say, hold him.
Well, right. That's
Hold
the
him.
point. They allowed this to happen. Again, maybe unintentionally, maybe very much intentionally.
But he's allowed to go on stage.
But they allowed it to happen, right? So that's just a fact, not contested. And yet even Republicans are like, maybe it's too much for the American mind to digest. You just don't think of your country as a place where that could happen. But why aren't, the more I think about it, the madder I get and the more afraid I get. I didn't see anybody with that view in Milwaukee, and I don't hear anyone with that view in the media. Like, why are we ignoring this?
And you could hear this as well from a lot of people just saying, hey, we support the Secret Service. We support the Secret Service. Secret Service is great. That being said, I will say, and you may not have seen this, there was a moment where Kim Cheadle, the head of the Secret Service, arrives in Milwaukee, goes into the Fiserv Forum, and is surrounded by senators and attendees and delegates, and they just start screaming at her. They just start absolutely laying into her.
Yeah, but that's the point where someone makes a citizen's arrest and says, I'm sorry, the guy got shot in the face because of your, at very best, negligence.
Yes.
It doesn't seem like maybe Americans or maybe conservative Americans or non-liberal Americans or whatever, people I know, are just not good at drawing the line. Like, this has to be the line. You cannot allow this or they're going to shoot you. I mean, that's just super obvious to me. You cannot allow this. Where's that famous Solzhenitsyn quote? They arrested a third of the population of Leningrad or something. And looking back from the Gulag, we all wish that we just said no. Do you know what I mean? And like put up a bit of a fight.
Well, and how would those officers have felt if they were the ones who were terrified of what would happen when they went home?
Well, exactly. So I don't know. I don't think that we're thinking about this enough. Like, this was one of the biggest things that's ever happened in this country.
The I don't want to say Republicans, but the side of the people, the side of freedom, you must, team humanity, whatever you want to call it, you can't let this go. You can never let this assassination attempt go until we have the bottom of it. Look what they did to Kyle Rittenhouse. Okay, Tucker, look what they did to Kyle Rittenhouse, and you were there, I was there, in terms of the investigation. We have every piece of video footage from that day was brought up. We have every piece of data. The FBI held a plane that was flying overhead that was, I'm certain, by the way, was also collecting cell phone information. That's one of the reasons that they kept this thing secret for so long. Oh, by the way, the FBI agent's testimony was done in the blind and then later stricken from the record. And then, we can't find the tapes of his actual, his actual deposition. So the FBI had footage overhead of what was going on. They did all this to Kyle Rittenhouse, who just defended himself, who was just a regular kid who defended himself and defended his town because he saw marauders coming in and trying to destroy everything. And so we get all the footage, we get all the investigation, we get the prosecution, we get everything that comes out of it. And yet Donald Trump seems to be very likely to be the next president of the United States, and we're told to just let it go. It makes no sense. No, if you care about your country and if you care about power, then what you would do, by the way, is, and this gets a little dark, but what you might do is to say, all right, we've shown him how close we can get. Now we're going to start putting people around him that we want him to listen to.
Yeah, well, that process has already begun. Okay, so you just said that if you were trying to take control of the United States government and you thought that Trump was going to win or it was too much trouble to shoot him again, that you would try to subvert the movement from within.
Yes.
Let's just back up one step. If Trump had been successfully murdered, that would have pleased a lot of people. I hate to say that, but it's true. What do you think would have happened then?
Civil war.
Yeah, I think that's unfortunate.
I mean, I think that, I think that at the convention, it was something that I wasn't ready to say it yet publicly.
It's so awful.
And so I was, doing the shows and I was talking about it and, it's kind of a rah-rah event and you were there. It was fun. It was very upbeat.
It was fun.
But at the same time, in the back of my head, I'm thinking, this would never have happened. That something would have broken out. And if that bullet had been 2 inches to the right, I mean, you'd be looking at massive uprisings all over the country.
That was my first reaction too. But then I thought, in order to rise up against something, you have to be organized.
Well, and I'm not saying it'd be successful.
That's exactly right. And if you really think about it, yes, Trump voters have lots of guns, but they have no way to communicate with each other.
Well, Tucker, here's what would happen.
By design.
Here's what would happen is you would see pockets of uprisings, probably around Mar-a-Lago, different things like that, and certainly different swaths of the country. We can all do the math on where that would be. And they would be put down, and those people you take January 6th, and then that operation that was run on people who attended January 6th would be run nationwide.
Of course.
When every Trump supporter becomes a member of the militia, you're a member of the insurrection, not because you went to January 6th, but because you're a Trump supporter, you're a potential extremist.
Every white man in America is a suspect.
So the election's done at that point.
Yeah.
The election's done. So you're not voting. It's not a real election. Sure, you go through the motions, the same way they're going through the motions of this fake, open primary, open process that Obama's talking about, but it's not real. So you would have it set up where it's a fait accompli, where you've now criminalized your entire opposition nationwide. And you're sure there'd be fighting. There's no question there'd be fighting. There'd be bloodshed. But I do think because of the lack of organization and because, look, despite what the media might tell you, that Republicans generally aren't insurrectionists. Like, people aren't actually
just the opposite.
Planning
they
to do
believe
this.
in the system. They like the system that we had for 250 years. It worked imperfectly, but still better than anyone else's system. And these dark forces have destroyed the system. And it wasn't the right that did that. It wasn't. Actually.
No, it certainly wasn't. And so you see this through, and by the way, this is what these dark forces do in any system where they want it to, whether it be pre-revolution France, whether it be Russia, whether it be Spain in the 1930s, whether it be, of course, China in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, et cetera, going up to the founding of the People's Republic of China. This is what always happens. So you see the infiltration through the institutions, you see agitation. By the way, you see direct operations run on the military, like we saw in the Russian Revolution, that it was the military that was really heavily targeted. And many of these units were used for radicalization. So the deserters from the Imperial Army become the first units of the Red Army, right? But instead of the guns pointing towards Germany, the German agent, Lenin, is then able to use them to turn their guns towards St. Petersburg.
Of course.
And so this level of subversion, this level of infiltration, now, of course, it's done differently now. And so because revolutions are different, because warfare is different, so it's not third generation warfare anymore, fourth generation, it's fifth generation. So we wouldn't expect to see literal civil wars. You would see things playing out, some kinetic aspects, but mainly online. So online, state power, regime power, and pockets of resistance.
That's right. And to continue the analogy, there's always a Kerensky who, promises to return to like the sensible center, but actually, unwittingly or not, is abetting the revolutionaries.
Yeah, I think Kerensky just got taken out.
Yeah, well, maybe that's right. But I certainly see a lot of them on the right. I mean, there were Republicans yesterday. Mitt Romney was one of them, who were sort of sending out tributes to Joe Biden for his selfless act on behalf of the nation, when it's not even clear that he had anything to do with it at all. It was just transparently non-democratic what happened yesterday.
Well, because
transparently,
when you're part of that
for someone
world,
like Mitt Romney to endorse that is so dark. Like, how can that guy be a senator, much less a Republican senator?
Meanwhile, at the same time, you've got Aaron Sorkin running around in op-eds saying that the Democrats should nominate. This is before we knew about that Biden dropped out. But yesterday morning, Aaron Sorkin has this huge piece saying that Mitt Romney should be the nominee of the Democrats to put him in. And so this goes to show you that at the end of the day, they don't care about the R, they don't care about the D, they don't care about whatever ideology they claim to be about. It's all about power. It's all about the club. It's all about Leviathan. It's all about the machine. And if you are going to keep things going, if you're going to keep the machine going, if you're going to keep the permanent state going, and the permanent managerial class, whatever, everyone's got they're like their own name for it, whatever what you want to call this system, that you're going to keep that going, you're our guy.
So you got to wonder, maybe this is unknowable, but Nikki Haley, who cheered the violence of the BLM riots, as Mitt Romney did as well, like, what do you think she thought when Trump got shot, honestly?
Tucker, I think Nikki Haley's an opportunist. I think she's someone who's incredibly ambitious. I think she's willing to go whichever way the wind's blowing. And I think Nikki Haley's first question probably was, how bad is it?
Yeah.
Because she knew that the same forces, by the way, that were trying to block J.D. Vance from becoming vice president would all have lined up behind a Nikki Haley candidacy at the convention. So we've got the Civil War aspect aside. Let's say what happens to the primary. It would have come down most likely to Nikki Haley versus Don Jr. I think that Don Jr. would have kind of inherited the certainly the sympathy and also the legacy. He's got the name. Everybody knows that he's his father's biggest supporter. And he's got the name ID to actually do that. So I think you would have seen the Trump grassroots base line up behind Don Jr., but you would see the oligarchs, you would see the power, you would see the money, a lot of this lining up behind
as they were before. I just don't understand the utility or the wisdom in keeping people like Nikki Haley or Mike Pompeo around. I mean, I had a friend once with an awful girlfriend, and she was just not a good person at all. And he married her, and she became an awful wife, and then wrecked his life. And I'm not saying that people don't change or redemption's impossible. Clearly they do, and it is. But it's unwise to keep bad people around you. And it's dangerous, actually. I don't understand why Nikki Haley or Mike Pompeo, who's a criminal, would be speaking at the Republican convention. That's not unity. That's a threat to you and to the country, I think.
And if you want to go really dark, Tucker, the question is, do we have clarity on when Nikki Haley was actually added to the RNC platform? When she was added to the schedule?
No.
I don't have clarity on that either, but I know that she initially wasn't there. So the story goes that Haley and Ron DeSantis, who had run against Trump in the primary, were initially not slated to speak on the RNC agenda. And at some point, they were later put on. Nikki Haley, of course, mentions in her speech, Donald Trump wants me to be here. And now there's that clip where it turns back to, I think it's Trump talking to J.D. Vance, and he's sort of mouthing his lips, and they've done the lip sync, and says that, the lip reading, and says that she wanted to speak. Here we go. So she wanted to speak. So Nikki Haley was able to push herself in, and whoever's running that piece said, okay, well, in the name of unity, we're going to let her in now. Well, Donald Trump gets up at these rallies again and again, and he recites the snake poem. He's talking about illegal immigrants usually. Well, wouldn't the same thing apply to Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo and John Bolton and all of these types?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, well, of course, I couldn't agree more. And it's not a matter of punishing people or not practicing forgiveness, which we're required to practice. And I think we should always extend forgiveness. But it's a question of self-protection. Do you want
forgiveness? Doesn't mean suicide.
I agree with that. And it doesn't mean you can forgive somebody and not invite them into your orbit.
Right, forgiveness is something that happens in your heart.
Exactly.
It's not, I'm going to let you in my house now and sit at my table.
But the attempted murder of Trump just shows how deadly serious these people are, how high the stakes are. Yes. And I just hope people are internalizing that lesson, but they don't seem to be at all.
That the lesson is that all of this can end in the blink of, again, half an inch to the right.
Yeah.
Half an inch to the right, and all of it goes away. Then there's a massive fight, Nikki Haley, Don Jr. But you look at some of this movement right now, and a lot of it is sort of on the precipice of Donald Trump. And because of his figure, because of his notoriety, because of his connection with the people. And by the way, the Democrats have this with like Barack Obama, for example, or they did, I guess you could say, in terms of their public support, not in terms of their institutional support, that you take him out and suddenly the whole thing's up for grabs, all of it.
It does seem to me impossible to know, of course, but the decision to put J.D. Vance in as his running mate does make it a little harder to extinguish the ideas when Trump exits the scene. I mean, it seems a little more like Trump's party in a real way now than it did before.
Well, this was something, and you had a tweet about this, where talking about those forces that were trying to stop J.D. Vance, and something I think that, those of us that knew what was going on behind the scenes.
Are you talking about Lindsey Graham?
I am talking about
that little liar, creepy little finger sniffer.
That people don't quite realize what all was going on. So what was really behind that tweet?
I've never seen anything like it. It's just full court press by the worst people I've ever met, and all of whom I know personally. Not all, I don't know Ken Griffin, but I know the rest of them personally because I lived in DC my whole life. And what was so striking to me, I mean, they're always behind the scenes lobbying campaigns for every position. Every time power changes hands, there's, someone who wants a piece of it. Got it. Same with money. Fine. But I've just never seen a clearer cut alignment between like everybody with bad motives, everyone who wants more killing for its own sake, everyone who's driven by really, really unholy impulses. They were all on one side pushing Marco Rubio, who, for the record, I think is a perfectly nice person, and Doug Burgum, whom I don't know. But they were adamant that it could not be J.D. Vance. And I do think you can judge, in the same way you can judge a tree by the fruit it bears, you can judge people by their supporters or detractors. And like every bad person, the people responsible for every horrible disaster this country has had over the last 15 years, they were all against J.D. Vance. I mean, and really against J.D. Vance. I mean like last minute desperation, offers of all kinds of things, just the ugliest kind of manipulation, lying, corruption, true corruption. And I mean up until 1 p.m. on Monday, this was going on. That's how high they thought the stakes were. It wasn't just like, well, I kind of prefer Marco to JD. No. And wow, I just thought that is the force that needs to be excised from the Republican Party. And they can join David Frum and Bill Kristol and all the rest of the world's worst people in the other party. Why do they have to hang around there? Like, you should have one semi-decent option in American politics. No?
Right. And
what are they doing here? Why are these people still here?
We can find another island of misfits somewhere, and they can go right next to the first one. And
but if you're into Stalinism, if you're into just like murdering people in faraway countries because it makes you feel like God, which is what guys like Frum and Kristol and John Bolton, that's what they're into. Of course, they're like impotent with tragic personal lives, but they feel powerful because they get to kill Ukrainians. We have a party for you. It's called the Democratic Party. Like, what are you doing here? Right?
Well, and this for the neocons in general, this is actually where they came from originally. And the reason they came out of the Democrat Party, and this is sort of the tier one, so like Irving and the rest, came over the Vietnam War.
Oh, yeah.
And so, wait, you guys are going anti-war. We can't have that. We need the war. We need the killing. We need the destruction. We need the... I'll just call it. I mean, it's demonic. It's demonic to want that level of death. I've been to China. I've been to Vietnam. I've been to Russia. I've been to many of the places affected, but Poland, obviously, that's been affected by this place where my family comes from. And it's horrific. It's an actual atrocity.
Well, of course, but the atrocity is the point. That's what you realize.
And then you realize the point of a system is what it does. And so for us, when we talk about the
point of a system is what it does.
Point of a system is what
I like that. I've never heard that.
Have you heard that? Yeah, that's sort of that's not mine. That's been going around. But if you think of it, if a system has a problem, well, then that problem would be fixed in maybe the next iteration or the next version of the system. You push out an update, not like CrowdStrike, but an actual fix. You would do something to fix your system. This is why the Constitution has amendments. They said, maybe we didn't quite get it right. We're going to allow you guys to amend this thing, and as you go, and work things out, maybe you need to. For example, one of the early fixes in that system was the presidency and the vice presidency. This idea that the second most vote getter would be this vice president led to an administration that was just too factious to work together. So fine, they came up with a new system where we now have sort of. I don't know. No, I don't think I said now, but I catch myself because I'm not sure that's exactly what we have now.
No, because they always hate each other. I've never seen a president and a vice president who didn't really hate each other.
Yeah. And now, well, hopefully the next one.
I hope that's true. There's something about the structure that makes it hard.
And it does. And the other idea then is that what if you leave that flaw? What if the flaw is there and it's kept in every iteration, every update of the system, every version of the operating system that gets pushed out always has this 0-day flaw that's still in it, or 0-day exploit that's what hackers talk about. And so you might start to realize that, wait a minute, what if that flaw that's creating this unwanted outcome actually is the real system? And everything that we've been told is just window dressing.
Exactly.
And so maybe the fact that communism kills 100 million people actually is the point of communism.
Of course.
And it's not equality, justice, diversity, DEI, peace, land, bread, as Lenin said, any of those things. What if the point actually is the killing?
And maybe if the victims are disproportionately Christian, which they have been always, from French Revolution to present. Maybe the actual point is opposing Christianity. Maybe your real enemy is Jesus. I'm just thinking. I mean, if the point of a system is what it does, and every so-called communist revolution, from the Maoist Revolution to the French Revolution to the Spanish Civil War to the Bolshevik Revolution, they all targeted Christians. And
So-
maybe that's the real enemy for them.
The Christians are the ones that, so when we wrote on humans, we had done this like podcast series on Chronicles of the Revolution and China Files. And I was just sort of going through it from a history perspective. And it was Christmas break and I wanted some extra content up there. So let's just talk about communism. But then as we started going through each of them, we realized like a pattern just started emerging. And the pattern was always the Christians are the first to go. Whether it's under the gun, whether it's under the guillotine, whether it's under the knife, whatever it, or in front of the cannon, whatever it is, it's the Christians that are always lined up first, to the point where Robespierre, at the very end of the Terror, is executing nuns
By guillotine. I was about to say it wasn't.
The Sisters of Copenhagen are led to in the streets of Paris.
God, I think you're the only person who knows that.
A French monarchy. So a French monarchy or a Catholic monarchy in France is completely overturned. The Notre Dame, by the way, another symbol which seems to be constantly under attack for some strange reason that can't help but notice. By the way, Michelle Obama also standing right next to it when it catches fire, sipping her champagne. Back in 1798, it gets turned over it gets deconsecrated as a cathedral.
Yeah.
So it's deconsecrated as a cathedral and is turned into a temple of reason.
Of course.
So a temple to a not God, a temple to a demon, a temple to another figure that is not God, that is not worshiping Christ. So, and they hold these cults. They actually called them cults back then, the cult of reason. And so there were cult ceremonies that were held in Notre Dame. Now, of course, it's been reconsecrated since then. And there was a guy by the name of Napoleon that actually played a huge role in this. The same way that that when churches were under attack in Spain in the 1930s, Franco plays a huge role in the restoration of the church. The same way that you see this in Russia following the end of the Soviet Union, the end of the Bolshevik rule, the churches start to get built again, start to get reconsecrated, et cetera, et cetera. You see this happening again and again.
Well, it's sort of interesting you mentioned that because, I'm 55, so I was here for it. The entire American left, to one extent or another, very few explicitly, but all of them, in effect, supported the Soviet Union. And they defended it, even sometimes while attacking it, but effectively they defended it for the entire length of its existence from, October 1917 to August 1991, they defended it. And then and they kind of were agnostic about Russia in the turmoil period. They were happy to loot it, which they did. But it was only when and they weren't against Putin. It was only when he started talking about Christianity that he became, the enemy, the overriding enemy.
You have Barack Obama in 2014 says, Crimea isn't an existential issue for us, it's an existential issue for them. And he didn't give it his blessing, but in that sort of Barack Obama way, he was, right? Trayvon Martin could have been my son. So he doesn't come out and say it, but that's him putting out his comment. And in the Washingtonology that we have to do now, like the Kremlinology. So the Washingtonology is that, okay, when they put out a statement like that, so Obama's like the voice of God on their side. He isn't the one, but he's the voice. And so when he puts out a statement, that's, okay, we're not going to do this. We're not going to worry about this. That's between Russia and Ukraine. Who really cares? Not a big deal. We're going to go in. But then the anti-LGBT law comes out in Russia. And that's the moment, and Pussy Riot starts going off, and it's totally funded, by the way. And then suddenly Pussy Riot's like in the US, and they're on House of Cards, and then House of Cards goes from this, British sort of like fun, backstabbing kind of show to this like massive anti-Russia thing. And there's these scenes with the Putin character, the Putin stand-in, where he's saying, I don't actually feel this way, but we must do this. This is the, and like they're teaching that Russia has become this anti-homosexual country, and that the entire point of the Russian government is to drive out homosexuality, which is just not true, by the way.
But also, who cares?
And it's also like,
who cares? I mean, I don't understand, like, why is that our business anyway?
And suddenly everyone in DC, the same way that the West Wing,
I know.
set the The show, I mean, Aaron Sorkin reference again, big L for those guys. A Few Good Men is still good. I'll give them that one. That the same way that The West Wing set the stage for the Clinton years and beyond, so it was this fake perfect version of the Clinton presidency. Then House of Cards sort of became this new mindset shift that was pushed. You must hate Russia now. You must hate Russia, but specifically not because they're doing Russian things like maintaining access to their Black Sea fleet, which duh, of course they're going to do that. It's not right or wrong. It's just that's their only port on the Black Sea. They're going to want that. They fought pretty hard for that over the years. They're not going to just give it up because we've instituted some coup. And by the way, keep in mind, Tucker, that at the time, Obama didn't want us paying attention to Ukraine too much because the coup was still ongoing. And this is the coup that took out Yanukovych and led to the complete CIA Victoria Nuland control of the current Ukrainian regime. Prior to that, right, why didn't you have Russia sending armies across for all those years in the interim? If they wanted it so bad, why not take it? The Ukrainian army didn't have any NATO support back then. The Ukrainian army didn't have any constitution. They could have just signed a piece of paper and said, yeah, Ukraine is never going to be its own country if they wanted to take over all of Ukraine and all of Europe, as opposed to actually looking at a potential growing threat inside Ukraine.
Yeah. And I agree completely. And the bigger question is, why would we risk nuclear war over a law on sex education? And the answer is because it was pro-Christian. That's why. And subverting Christianity is the program. That is the program, right?
And so think about it, right? When people say, "Well, wait a minute, Tucker," but here in the United States, we have churches. We have church all over the place. We could see them. We can drive around, and here's a church, there's a church, etc. But I guess to borrow a phrase, the churches are in the closet.
Of course,
right? So you can go behind closed doors and you can pray to whatever God you want. We're totally fine with that. Just keep it in there. Don't bring it out here. Don't bring it into the public. In the 1950s, we used to have the 3 crosses of Calvary were displayed across the skyline of New York City. We'll never see that in our lifetime. We won't. Maybe my kids will.
Yeah,
maybe
you don't know where this is going.
But right now, what do you see? You see the trans flag.
Oh, of course.
You see the pride flag, and it's displayed on full promise. Okay, that is subversion. That shows the ideological control, the ideological hegemony that's taken over inside the United States.
So, sorry, we just got
breaking.
All right. This is from Charlie Kirk. I'm reading this cold. I got a weird lead on a story people ought to look into. I got a call from a source close to Las Vegas Metro Police. The official story was that Biden's trip was cut short last week due to COVID. However, according to this source, U.S. Secret Service informed Las Vegas Metro that there was an emergency situation involving Joe Biden and to close necessary streets so that POTUS could be transported immediately to University Medical, which they began to do in earnest. Then mysteriously, there was a stand-down order, and the Secret Service informed local Vegas PD that they were going to medevac POTUS to Johns Hopkins, which they presume meant fly him back east as soon as possible. Apparently, the rumor mill in the police department was that Joe Biden was dying or already dead, possibly. I didn't think too much about this lead. It seemed too wild to be true, but given that Joe Biden has been out of public sight for days and dropped out of the race via an X post, and his brother James indicated health was a factor, I'm beginning to grow more curious if COVID or something else has been more serious than reported. If anyone with Las Vegas Metro has information, please email freedom@charliekirk.com. I want to hear if there's more to the official story than what they're telling us.
Well, I'm sure Las Vegas Metro would be just as open as forthcoming as they were during the during the October shooting.
Yeah, the worst mass shooting in American history,
which is never spoken of again.
They tried to drive me out of a camera position while I was doing a story on it. Yeah, clearly there's something
known for being open and forthcoming.
Yeah, like the city itself. Clearly something is going on here. Obviously, I don't know what it is. I know its hallmark, which is secrecy. Secrecy is the hallmark of lying. So if you want to know, is someone lying? Well, I don't know. Is he hiding something? Well, then he's lying, right? So they're lying. So I just want to, before we stop, because I want to put this up on the inner tubes very soon. You just wrote a book on communist revolution called Unhumans. I could ask you a million questions about this. I think it's one of the most interesting topics there is.
Thank you.
But just tell us, like, based on the research you did and the thinking you did while writing this, what are the hallmarks? What are the signs of the kind of revolution that's destroyed so many countries.
Well, so the first thing you would expect to see are these mass grievance outpourings, and not just mass grievance outpourings. And this is key, by the way, not just actual grievances from the people. You would expect to see it from the mouthpieces of institutions. You would see it from universities. You would see it from media, mass media. You would see it from elected leaders or national leaders in some cases. And not just grievances, by the way, about maybe something that's ongoing that can be fixed. Like, oh, the energy supply is having trouble. We need more energy, like an actual grievance.
Right.
Or, we need more beds in our hospitals, something like this. Those are legitimate actual grievances.
Well, sure, the functions of government, yeah.
But what you would hear are more systemic grievances. There is a problem with our system. There is a problem with our government. There is a problem with our country. The way that it was
imprecise
founded.
complaints that are impossible to address.
Precisely.
Racism, transphobia. Well, okay, great. What do I do about that exactly? What is the problem exactly? What is equity exactly? They're imprecise.
They're imprecise, and so and then you would also expect to see ideological incohesion. So the idea that you would stand for whatever's popular at the moment as a response to those grievances. So we're going to beef up security, but also we're going to defund the police. We're for more housing, but not housing over here. We're going to do housing over there. But we're also for price controls. How do you have more housing plus price controls, right? It doesn't possibly work. And Thomas Sowell's obviously written a million times about this. You would constantly be changing whatever your policies are because you don't actually care about your policies. You're not ideologically driven and you're not pragmatically driven either. You're always constantly telling people we need to do more. We need to fight this imaginary force. And because so...
White supremacy, Christian nationalism.
Systemic racism, police brutality. Great example. No, it's not to say, and everyone's always like, oh, no, you're back to blue, who, that's so silly. It's like, no. Like, obviously people are going to be people and people make mistakes, but body cams were introduced because we were told that police were lying about crime and they were making it all up, and police in New York were just cracking down on black and brown people, and that's why we need body cams everywhere. So the police department said, fine, fine, we'll do the body cams. You know what? Then you can finally believe what we're seeing. You know what the body cam showed, Tucker? That the level of crime was exactly consistent with what had been reported before. Yeah, and the body cams just showed the violent crime. And so now you're starting to actually see, because this was a direct progressive thing, body cams on cameras, body cams on, police body cams. Now they say, well, we don't want the body cams because the body cams are helping the police too much and they're giving them surveillance options and they're being used to direct people.
Yeah, noticing is racist.
So wait a minute. You said you wanted this specific thing. We gave you this specific thing, and now you're against it because it's helping us. So were you actually for truth?
Right.
Were you actually for noticing things that are going on in reality? Or are you driving towards something else? Do you have something else that's hidden? And so what's underlying and what we found out in the book, of course, is it's always the overturning of whatever government is in place, whatever power is in place, whatever system is in place is completely overturned. Spain, for example, Catholic monarchy. France, Catholic monarchy. Both of those had to be overturned. Both of those were usurped. And as you said before, these attacks on Christianity are a hallmark, a direct hallmark. So what we see in the United States, well, start slower, right? Because in the United States, you have a problem. You don't have the haves and the have-nots. The separation between oppressor and oppressed is harder in the United States because in a lot of the countries in the past where they've tried this, you have this sort of pyramid structure where you've got a couple of people at the top that are doing really well and then a lot of people at the bottom that aren't. And so, you get the people at the bottom to attack the people at the top. That's Marxism. Marxism is a tactic. It's not an ideology. It's not a belief system. It's just a tactic that's used to get all these people down here to fight those people up there.
Exactly. No one ever read Das Kapital. I mean, the whole thing it's nonsense.
It's right there. It's complete nonsense. Yeah. And what you do in the United States then, because you realize, well, wait a minute, we've got this more of a diamond shape, right? So in diamond-shaped society where you've got this middle class, you say, okay, we've got these people in the middle and they're already kind of fat and happy because they're doing well and they've got kids and yards and suburbs and all of this. So you look for other ways to divide up a society. You divide it up by tribe, you divide it up by ethnicity, you divide it up by gender. So you use sociology. Then the Soviet Union falls, by the way, and so you really have to get away from the economic stuff. And so you say, fine, we don't worry about that. But what we do worry about is, what other kind of majorities are there? Oh, there's a white majority. Okay, so the white majority is oppressing everybody else. And the white majority is actually the one that's doing all of this. And then it plays on these ideas of white guilt as well to tap into the support for these, again, these other tribes that you're creating. I'm not saying that they're creating races, but what I'm saying is you're splitting people up and pitting them against each other.
One of the most unfair things I've ever seen, ever. And the fact that, the white majority put up with it for even a second, it really says something bad about them, I think. Like, what?
So, I mean,
build the greatest country ever, the most humane, fair, decent country with tons of flaws, but compared to what? And sit there for years and have people spit in your face for something that you didn't do? You did just
and are
the opposite.
driven out from your cities, driven out from your towns, driven out from the places that you built. And I talk
and
about
you put up with it.
I talk about my hometown all the time. So this, like, where I come from outside of Philly, just outside Philly, it didn't really hit until like the 90s. And that's when, Section 8 started hitting. And that's when all the drugs started getting flooded in. And like right after we left, it becomes a sanctuary city. So illegals were already bubbling up, but then it's like officially becomes a sanctuary city. And I remember being a kid and I'm like writing letters to the local newspaper, don't do this. You are going to ruin everything in our town. And this was like, your idyllic, not idyllic, but it's a town. It's like a town of real people who knew each other, who grew up together, who lived there for 100 years with all of the families, it's intertwined, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it. But the kids that I grew up playing with were the children of the kids my father grew up playing with, and his father grew up playing. We were all baptized at the same church. We were all born at the same hospital, that kind of place, ever since we came from Poland for, again, a century. And then all of a sudden, government comes in, and not just government by itself, by the way, but specific forces within the federal government. It's just my town. Like, this was done across the country, towns after town after town. And Jeremy Carl, of course, has a great book about it. But it's just knowing that experience and knowing that
what's interesting
I won't have that for my kids.
No, but the effect was just destruction. And that's the thread that connects all the revolutions that you consider in this book.
Yes.
Is that things, you can have a violent revolution. It's not that hard. You just have to be willing to kill people. And, they have been. But the effect wasn't an improvement. It was a dramatic decline in people's happiness, standard of living.
Life expectancy.
Yeah. And then, of course, the death toll was in the tens of millions.
Yeah, so if you're a Russian serf and you go to be, a Russian serf and you say, oh, let's get rid of the Tsar and then everything's going to be great. So you get rid of the Tsar and you kill him and his family and you're slaughtering the children and suddenly are things going to get better? No, now you've got to go work on the commune, and if you complain about it, you get sent to the gulag.
But so that raises like a really interesting point that I never hear anybody ask, which is, okay, so like the famous Robespierre, speaking of the French Revolution, the famous Robespierre phrase is you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet.
Right.
Okay, well, I'm against that.
Chairman Mao said, a revolution is not a dinner party.
Right, That's right. And I'm opposed to that. However, it makes intuitive sense. You have to do hard things to get good results. But the results were worse every single time. And just referring back to your great line that the point of an organization is what it does.
Point of system.
Rather, a system, then maybe making people suffer was the whole point.
So this, and we talk about this in the book. So in the Unhuman Playbook, if you just, again, looking at it from their perspective, people will say, now a rational person might say, how can you still support communism after communism's killed 100 million people, right? Well, turn that back around on itself. What if killing 100 million people was the point? If you talk to one of them and you actually got them to answer you truthfully, they would say that 100 million, that's a good start. We need to add to that because those were Christians, those were racists, those were people who stood in the way of our utopia. And those people need to be removed from our system before we can have what it is that we truly want.
Yeah, and I think some people believe that. I think, Simon Sebag-Montefiore wrote the most amazing book about Stalin with access to the internal archives called In the Court of the Red Tsar, I think it's called. But anyway, and we learn from Stalin's personal correspondence that he was actually a true believer. He believed in this.
Yes.
But I think given the totally consistent track record of revolutions, all of which result in more human suffering, utopia never arrives. The opposite, dystopia, arrives. I just think at that point, it's obvious there are supernatural forces involved. People are acting against their own interest as people. The point is killing people. If the point is killing people, that's not a human impulse. There are supernatural forces here, right?
One of the ways
that's my view.
And if you talk to Spanish Catholics about this, like Spanish Catholics who have their eyes open, I should say, which I have, and my wife and I went and visited the Valley of Fallen in research for this book, and we walked around and we saw where Franco's original grave was and all of this, and you realize that, wait a minute, this was the equivalent to a modern crusade.
Oh yeah,
what happened in the 1930s, because they saw demons, actual demons, taking the form of men and killing priests, raping nuns on the altar, and then taking the nuns' bodies and displaying the skeletons with their habits on in the public square, and saying this is a sign of what we will do to the church, what we will do to you, what we will do to your family. The same forces get unleashed in China in the 1960s.
By the way, with the help of a lot of Americans, by the way,
many
Abraham
Americans.
Lincoln Brigade and a lot of others, a lot of
Ernest Hemingway,
well, 100%.
is like hanging out. Emma Goldman.
Yes, George Orwell.
But Orwell actually comes out better than most in the wash.
It changed his life. He was shot in the throat on sentry duty. He wrote a wonderful book about it, in which he doesn't mention being shot, I don't think, but called Homage to Catalonia.
Yes.
But that completely changed his world.
Oh, you do? Yeah, a ton.
Great book, but it changes his worldview completely. But my only point is, like, this wasn't about Spain.
No.
Do you think Ernest Hemingway or John Dos Passos or all these sort of literary celebrities and leftists from the United States, do you think they knew anything about Byzantine Spanish politics, which is so freaking complicated? I've tried to understand it.
Yeah.
It's impossible to understand any Spanish politics, period, always has been. So they didn't have any understanding of this at all. They were drawn by an instinct.
It's the marketing.
Toward darkness. No, they were, though.
Well, so it's rooted in romanticism. So it's this idea of, in the same way that it is Luciferian, right? So the original. So Lucifer says, I can do better than God. Look what God has created. Look at all these problems. Look at things aren't going well. I don't like this. I can do better than God. I will create utopia on earth. And so this is what leads him to rebel against the throne. This is why Lucifer comes at God. Now, God, of course, destroys him because he's God. So Lucifer and the fallen angels become the demons. And the demons realize that, okay, you can't make open war on God because God will destroy you. So what do? You attack his creation.
Yeah.
So if God's connection to his creation is through the human heart, then that's where you strike. So you take over through the heart. And C.S. Lewis, of course, Screwtape Letters, all of this, talk about it, how this is how you're able to infiltrate the human heart. And when you infiltrate the human heart, you can suddenly turn it into these madmen, the actual demonic control of individuals through these ideas of what we are doing is for the greater good. What we are doing is for the future. We are smashing the old. And so you require these propaganda operations again and again and again, over time and over time, to be able to get people to commit some of the most horrific, again, in raping nuns on an altar.
Oh yeah.
Happened a lot. The bayoneting of the Romanov children. Bayonets. Against children,
People
little girls.
They were shot. They weren't.
Little girls and boys. They were also shot and bayoneted.
Yeah, but they were almost all. The testimony that came out much later was they were almost all of them alive when the shooting stopped.
One of the reasons for that is, and it's horrific to say, but so this is they're in the Ipatieff house in Yekaterinburg, and they say the guards aimed too high.
Yep.
Because the kids weren't tall enough. That the first volley, they see their parents being killed, and they say, by the way, that Alexandra, the Tsarina, that she died making the sign of the cross as her children lied there. And
just remember, a lot of the ruling class of Russia supported this crap at first.
Well, they supported it. They said, "Oh, we need to go along. We don't want to upset the boat. We don't want to."
It was the Black Lives Matter.
We don't want to be politically. By the way, Tucker, you see this again and again. You see it in the French Revolution too, where Louis goes along with it.
Of course,
Louis goes along with it and says, "You know what? Yeah, these are fine. These are just some reforms. They're just." And at first, it was just like some tax
Jack, we
stuff.
just need sentencing reform. Actually,
it's just criminal reform. Yeah. So the next stage is they release the criminals.
Oh yeah.
Right. The criminals go in, and this is anarcho-tyranny. So anarcho-tyranny comes in. By the way, not to necessarily destabilize the country or inflame the country. Anarcho-tyranny is used to pacify the middle class. So the criminals are out there, and you're supposed to just sort of keep your head down. Oh, the planes have all been shut down again, so I can't fly today because CrowdStrike passed a bad update. Oh, okay. And you just accept more and more and more.
I lived in that neighborhood.
Totalitarianism. Over and over and over. You accept more violence over and over. And I guess the answer, and we do, by the way, give some hope at the very end of all this, is that it doesn't have to be this way. Like we actually don't have to live this way, as a matter of fact. That every person has the ability, whether it's within your own circle, within your own town, or perhaps you've got a, big platform, or, you're someone like Trump who's running for office. You have the ability to actually change things. And, we talk about like local libraries and parks and recreation centers. I know it sounds kind of silly, but it's like your local communist, they're looking at the public library and they know that if I can get into that library and I can get that front row of books that comes in every time you walk into a library. And currently it's pretty much every public library in America, by the way, right now, that's how infiltrated we are. You will be hit with political propaganda on racism and DEI and all of this and transgenderism when you first walk in. So when children walk in, why? Because the communist recognizes that as a node of power. So the communists will take it over. They will infiltrate it and they'll take it over. Then look at the Parks and Rec department. So, I get that, there's like this conservative response to say, oh, drag queen story hour. But it's like, well, but do you understand what's going on? Do you understand you're looking at a system? Do you understand you're looking at a system that's playing out exactly how it was designed to play out? Because the point of the system is what it does. So your local communist is looking at that Parks and Rec department saying, I've got to get in there and I've got to start indoctrinating the children and I've got to turn the children against the parents. Because again, that's exactly what they do every time. And so you're sowing the seeds for this eventual takeover and total power.
Yeah. And if you can't recognize what happened 9 days ago as a watershed, they shoot Trump in front of all of us. You don't see that as a turning point, then there's
and think of it. So Trump's assassination attempt, Steve Bannon locked up as a political prisoner, Peter Navarro just gets out as a political prisoner. The palace coups of sitting leaders, all of this has happened before. All of this, literally to the letter, has happened before. The only point is, if you're just sitting there going with the flow saying, oh my gosh, I can't understand what happens next. No, all of this has happened before. I'll tell you exactly what happens next. And it gets really dark if people don't fight back.
Jack, thank you. We're going to put this up.
Let's do it.
Thanks, man.
Appreciate it.
That was awesome.
So it turns out that YouTube is suppressing our show. I know. Shocking. That in an election year, with everything at stake, Google would be putting its thumb on the scale and preventing you from hearing anything that the people in charge don't want you to hear. But it turns out it's happening. So what can you do about it? Well, we could whine about it, but that's a waste of time. We're not in charge of Google. Or we could find a way around it, a way that you could actually get information that's true. It's not intentionally deceptive. And the way to do that on YouTube, we think, is to subscribe to our channel. Subscribe, and you'll have a much higher chance of hearing what we say, and we hope you will.